Today on the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast, two trials of conscience in Man for All Seasons, 1966, and Hacksaw Ridge on the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
Day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
You gotta keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Today, continents apart and separated by 400 years, the true stories of Thomas More and Desmond Doss in A Man for All Seasons and Hacksaw Ridge. Is the years right?
Yeah, I was doing the math. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Hi, I'm Aaron Wilson, writer, director, and lover of morally fraught films.
Hi, I'm Cameron Provo, professional video editor, amateur musician, trying to be professional musician, sound design extraordinaire, lover of God, and glad to be here on the podcast today.
Cool.
And I'm Mark Klobos, a man who loves maybe 2.5 seasons, but is not for all of them.
Oh, good. It's playing on the side all seasons. Great.
Man for maybe 2.5 seasons at most.
Yes.
Can we use that one, please?
We can use it. What seasons, though?
Well, definitely winter and spring and maybe the latter half of fall. But
it's A Man for 2.5 seasons.
Yes, if the it cools down enough in time in the fall. So
today, just as always, we'll review our two films, and then we go crisscross to compare and contrast. But first, Mark, what media have you been watching?
Well, I've had the good fortune to see two films. One of them was occasioned by the recent death of Alain Delon, the great French actor of the New Wave. I finally had the opportunity to watch Le Samurai, the film he did with Jean-Pierre Melville in 1967, and it was absolutely amazing. It was, the setting was great, the acting was great. It's a crime thriller where he's an assassin who, in the first act, goes through this elaborate process over the course of an evening to kill someone and set up his alibi. So it's like you're seeing him go through this process of setting up the alibi, and then you're seeing what he does, and then you're seeing him finish up his alibi, and then and then gets called in by the police. They do sort of a round up the usual suspects type of thing, and so he has this pressure from the police who are trying to break his alibi. While at the same time he's facing pressure from his employer as well. And it's just really neatly done. I've proposed it for a future episode, but I hadn't seen it until now. And now I'm really hoping we double.
What were you pairing it with? I don't remember.
Ghost Dog.
Okay.
The Jarmusch movie. And it's a similar theme because while it's not as overt in this, the premise is sort of the lone warrior who lives by a particular code and is the only one who does so, while all people around him, engage in much more amoral activities, or not amoral, but who
against his way, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and how he sticks by it, and that's part of what makes him as honorable and effective as he is. So, but it's the same basic idea of the person who has the Bushido code, and who sticks to those rules in a world of sin and corruption and crime and all that. Even though, I mean, they're hardly fighting it; they're participants in it. They just have their way, and it's really neat. How about you? What are you doing?
Well, bouncing off that, I'm gonna go kind of in reverse. I got to see Interstellar in the IMAX 70 release a couple weeks back.
Is that still in the theater?
No,
it was blinking. You missed it. I wanted to see that, and by the time I got on, all the tickets were sold.
I bought the tickets. I'll go back even further in time. I saw Joker 2. I actually liked it. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I think it's actually pretty good. Anyway, I saw it again. We went to the IMAX 70 showing of it because we knew nobody was going to go to that. So it's like the perfect opportunity to go see an IMAX movie with no one in the theater. So I asked the lady out front, I'm like, when are I knew that they were going to re-release Interstellar. And she's like, it'll be sold on a Wednesday. We don't know what day. So every single Wednesday for the next month, I checked. And the one Wednesday I forgot. Wednesday I forgot to check was the Wednesday that they released the tickets.
Okay.
And so on Thursday I found out I picked the last showing that they had, and I still wasn't even in that great of seats. Yeah. But it was amazing. That was a rough night too. I had to stay late at work because we got slammed on some last minute edit, and I was really like just not having it. I was really upset, and then getting to go to see that after was just like, it was such a treat. So
jealous.
But I saw Andrew Rublev, which is a Tarkovsky film I told you about.
Oh yeah,
It's about the icon painter from the 14th century. Really good. It's 3 hours long.
yeah.
It's in Russian, in black and white, so you can get an idea of what that's kind of like. But it was good. It's about like divine spark.
Russian, no subtitles.
No, with subtitles. I wish I could speak Russian, but
Yeah.
That one was really good. I found out I'm a Christian, right? So I was watching that, and it was really inspiring to show how God kind of gives Andre this divine spark, and something happens in the middle of the film where he like feels like he has to step away from God or like take a vow of silence, stop doing his gift, and then he realizes at the end he's like, no, I need to kind of
cool.
pick that back up. So that was cool. Made me want to watch more Tarkovsky films. And then
That's really fascinating. You have a film that Christian that was made during the Soviet era.
Yeah, and how big of a budget it is too. He was an Orthodox Christian. He was able to trick the Soviets into making a huge budget Christian film, which was really cool. And with an explicitly Christian narrative too.
Yeah, I mean, I did propose we include more Russian films. I haven't quite taken up that gauntlet.
I'm not quite as versed in those ones, but yeah.
Me neither.
I'll have to get more nerdy with my films. I don't know. I think we're pretty obscure to begin with. But,
so what have you been watching, Aaron?
yeah, Skeleton Crew, which is the new Star Wars show.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty good.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I was kind of turned off by it at the beginning because they're on this planet that looks very much like Earth.
Yeah,
It looks like Earth in the 80s. The backpacks look exactly like Earth backpacks.
Stranger Things planet.
Yeah, Stranger Things planet. And once you get over that, though, it's and they get off the planet pretty quickly. It's just a really fun romp, and it's in the style of the Goonies. And I think the thing I enjoyed most about it was there wasn't some bigger, I don't know, political message or whatever they're trying to put in there. It's just a fun little, it felt like a young adult thriller or something like that. But
cool. I'll have to check that one out. I've been waiting to watch it. So
yeah, it's pretty fun. So
do you remember, did you ever do the, was it the Boom Op course at SEC or like that
No.
workshop? So Thrasher, the one who comes to visit, he did the crane work on Skeleton Crew.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of cool. Fun connection to SEC.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what we've been watching. Just like always, we'll be diving deep. Fair warning. Here there be spoilers. And now our review of A Man for All Seasons.
I find I learned a long time ago that I'm what's called an associative listener, which is that I tie certain things to the music I hear. So I'm not good with lyrics, but it's more that association. And that's one of the reasons why I love how they open this movie, which is you open with that fanfare of trumpets. And I absolutely love how they use the trumpets. So for me, it's so evocative of this image or this association I have with the era. And I think the way they do it, it just brings you right into it. The movie won so many Oscars, and it won for like I think cinematography, color. It won for like costume design, and you really see that all on the screen.
Yeah,
I don't know how you guys saw it. I saw the Blu-ray they did a few years ago.
Yeah, I got that Blu-ray too. I ordered that this week, so I watched that last night. I love the gargoyles too. It's so.
Yeah,
It's like
I love
mysterious.
those shots at the beginning. It's like, what is this about? Where are we? Like, if you haven't, it's like, where is this set? What is, I don't know.
Yeah.
They spend basically those first 6 minutes simply establishing the era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're getting in this movie is basically you're starting in the middle.
Yeah. That's what I noticed too, because I feel like, especially back, it must have been, it's obviously made for British audiences, because I had no idea what was going on the first 5 minutes. I had to pause it, look up who Thomas More was, figure out what's the context, King Henry, the whole, I remember that reading that in school, but not to this detail.
Yeah, this is the middle of the English Reformation, or the middle of the beginning, so to speak. So we're being introduced in the midst of this.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see how Bolt does this in a way that he really, I feel like he's really trying to keep the exposition to a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, Aaron.
Yeah, it's like there is no expedition up in the front besides some shots of ducks. But it kind of just, when things are relevant, they come up.
Yeah,
is how it handles it. And I had the same thing at the beginning of, like, I was confused who's what and what's going on, but as soon as it becomes relevant, it comes into the story. So
and it happens. It's not, and the exposition is. I feel like one of the things that I love most in a film is when they trust the audience to be smart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what Bolt does, and I absolutely love this about the film, is it's not through one character telling another character something. It's through these dialogues that they have. And there's so many dialogues. Mm-hmm. And here's where I think it really helps that there are so many great actors. Fred Zinnemann, the director, said this was the easiest film he ever directed. He directed over 24 of them.
Oh, wow.
Very notable films, like he did High Noon, he did Day of the Jackal. But he said this was the easiest film he ever did because the caliber of the actors was so good.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Shaw. It was cool to see Robert Shaw because my favorite movie's Jaws. Mm-hmm. See him as the king. He's so great. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's Quinn. I know.
didn't even realize that.
and he's read Grant in From Russia with Love. He has this amazing career. This is the only film he ever got an Oscar nomination for.
Oh, cool.
And what's really fascinating about that is when you look at the amount of screen time he has.
It's like 5 minutes.
He's got basically two scenes.
Yeah.
Two scenes. And that's one of the reasons why I was thinking
his presence is felt the entire movie.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, he makes you like you're like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. Like he makes you like the king, even though the king's a bad guy.
Although
he's cool until you disagree with him.
Yeah, and then you're like
into a different guy.
Yeah,
and really you only get that from one scene. Which is he really gets the nomination not just for two scenes he's in. He gets it for just the one scene.
Yeah,
and yet it's fascinating how he is. And this is where your influence on me, Eric. I'm trying to think about who's the antagonist because historically it's Henry VIII, but in the film it's not really Henry VIII.
And he's basically the emperor in this one, and Darth Vader is Cromwell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's a fascinating analogy, but I think you're absolutely right.
So,
I like that.
So, but of course, this is not, the Man for All Seasons isn't Henry. It's not Cromwell. It's Thomas More, played by Paul Scofield. Mm-hmm. And he gets the Oscar for this role. And it's, apparently I read there was real struggle to convince the studio to cast him as opposed to someone with a bigger name. He was a stage actor, very successful, but he was not a big name, star. And apparently to get him to do it, a lot of people took pay cuts for this. And I read that the only people who got their full salary for this was, I think, Schofield, Susanna York, who plays his daughter, and of course Orson Welles, because that man was never going to take a pay cut at this point in his career. He needed that money. And so we get Moore going to see Cardinal Wolsey, who was the man in red who was writing the letter.
Yeah, Orson Welles.
Which the makeup they did on.
It's just
he already looks dead.
Yeah.
I think the makeup choice though was to make him look like he's like 1 foot in the grave.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're jumping forward a little bit, but that conversation where he's having with Thomas was interesting because he starts bringing up Leviticus, which says like, no, King Henry with Thomas.
The big conversation they have at Warsaw.
Yeah. So maybe we should wait, but
no, go ahead.
Okay. No. So they're talking about the marriage. Thomas is trying to say, or no, not Thomas. Henry's trying to say like it's incest. It's not valid under the guise of Leviticus. But then he brings up Deuteronomy. But he doesn't say the verse. But I was thinking about Deuteronomy too, because in like Mark and in Jewish culture, if the guy died with a wife and they didn't have kids, then the culture was that the brother of the man would marry the wife so that she could have kids. They would give the estate to the son. And that's Deuteronomy 25, 5-10 is what Thomas is talking about. So technically, what he was supposed to be. That's what he was supposed to do. So if you look at like Deuteronomy, the marriage is valid. It's interesting though that the Pope at the time had to give like permission towards that.
Yeah. Well, it was about basically, giving the stamp of authorization.
Yeah.
And this is where, what Henry was doing was probably not going to ever succeed, because he basically was telling the church, okay, church, I want you to invalidate this marriage because you screwed up in interpreting the Bible. And which
that's not the reason why.
No, yeah.
And you're not really going to get much leeway in getting what you want from someone by telling you screwed up, now make it right.
Yeah.
Especially
that's kind of Henry's character in the movie and in real life.
It's like, it's really your fault that I want to leave my wife.
Yeah.
And so you get, and of course Wolsey is feeling this pressure, and Wolsey is a fascinating person because he is a cardinal in the church.
Yeah.
And yet, and this wasn't exactly unheard of, but he's a leader in the church. He's an official in the church, and yet he is serving the king. So he basically has these two masters, and you get that the first of the great exchanges, which is between him and Moore, where you see the difference between the man of practical values. Wolsey is that great line about how if you were just a bit more cynical, you'd be a statesman or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you get Moore, who is presented from the start as being a man of these very firm principles, these very strong ideals, which are very admirably presented.
Yeah, my favorite line of the Cardinals is, "If only you didn't have that terrible moral sense."
Yeah,
I'm like, religious figure. Yeah, I don't need that. It's like
what's shocking for me is that chain he was wearing. I thought, because I'm not too familiar on the like logistics of the Catholic Church, so I thought that might have just been what Cardinals had.
No, that was
finding
chain.
out.
That
finding out later
too. When that transferred to Moore, I'm like, okay, he's the Cardinal now. No, he's the Chancellor.
So I'm like, oh well, so this Cardinal is he's got two masters. Like he's supposed to be serving the church, but he's serving the king, and it's like you can't have two masters without hating the one and loving the other.
And Henry expects that Wolsey, by virtue of his presence in the church, should be able to affect this, and of course Wolsey, at the end of the day, can't. And that's where, when you see Wolsey again, he's still a cardinal. He's still the chancellor, but he's effectively in exile because he has failed. And Henry basically has said, "Get out of my sight. You're no use to me." Yeah. Because at the end of the day, Wolsey doesn't, he's not the Pope. He can't make it happen.
That was my favorite line he said too. And he's like on his deathbed. He said, "If I had been half as much as good to God as I had been to the king, then I wouldn't be dying in this hole," or whatever,
Yeah, and that kind of implies he's sort of the fate of the person who compromises his faith and his values in the service of power.
Yeah.
So he's and
which also another character that ends up being an example of that is Rich.
Yeah.
And he's less about the faith and a bit more about power, but I don't know if you noticed this, but he's very young in this movie.
Yeah, John Hurt. Yeah,
John Hurt. Ollivander from Chestburster and Ollivander from Harry Potter.
Yeah, I mean, and he's
I didn't know he was Ollivander.
Yeah.
He's on Doctor Who too. John Hurt's been in.
He's the War Doctor. He was an alien. I mean, John. You're seeing him at the beginning of this very long career.
Yeah,
and he is so impossibly young in this.
Yeah,
it's him and Vanessa Redgrave, who both have these incredibly long careers, and so you're looking at them and they're like the bloom of youth. That is like, wow, it's hard to believe they look like, because I'm so used to seeing John.
They never were young.
After you have this meeting where Moore, he's chastised by the cardinal, and then he's leaving, and he's accosted by all these petitioners because he's, among his roles, he's a judge, and you have this woman who gives him this silver cup as a bribe.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting how that silver cup becomes such an important plot point.
Yeah,
and you get that, and I love what he does. He's being rowed back, by the water taxi, and he is holding the cup, and he knows it's a bribe, and he tosses it. He doesn't even toss it; he just drops it in the Thames. Like the minimum, the
boatman grabs it immediately.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Before we move on too far, I just want to cover another of my favorite lines from that conversation with the cardinal. He's like, when statesmen abandon their private conscience for their public duties, they lead their countries on a short route to chaos.
Yeah, that's good.
There's a lot of really good lines like that.
There's so many good lines.
You kind of got to think a little bit to understand what it means, and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to keep my line readings to a minimum because it's like you could. This is such a quotable movie.
Yeah,
it is such a wonderfully quotable movie. I've got about a half dozen that I've identified. I'm trying to hold back on just reciting the dialogue.
And then the cardinal tells him to come down to earth, and he never listens to that.
I know, it's like it's crazy that the cardinal who's supposed to be up in heaven is telling the guy to come down to earth.
Yeah, Moore is portrayed as the true man of religious principles of faith, and Wolsey the man who is dressed in the robes of the church, which is interesting because it underscores the very point of the Reformation, which is that the church was being corrupted by its involved with secular. It needed to reform, and they imply that Moore's on board with this. He's just not on board with breaking from the church.
He occupies this kind of odd middle ground of he really doesn't like Protestantism. And he doesn't but he's very staunchly Catholic. And that's kind of but he acknowledges throughout the movie that the church needs reform, but the thing that the king is doing is more of a selfish thing, and it's not for the right reasons, and that's where he stands.
And that actually gets to my issue with how he's portrayed it and my criticism, but I'm going to save that for when it becomes
we'll get there.
Relevant. But when he's rode home and he's met by Richard Rich. We've already introduced him. He's part of the party that they have at the house when Moore gets the message, but Rich is lobbying him for a position. And there's something I find so relatable about what Richard Rich is doing. Richard Rich, and this is why you need somebody as young as John Hurt playing him, is he's hungry for a position.
Yeah, he wants a job, and he wants a good job.
He's got the brains for it. He's got the ambition for it, and I really missed this when I previously watched it, but I get so fascinated by his arc in this movie. Yeah, because he wants to do things. He wants to follow more. He wants to respect more.
Yeah, he's got those values, and he's got that eagerness of youth, but he's also got this naivety that just is kind of his downfall. Of he's not realizing what's happening. But we'll get there.
But what he has most is that ambition.
Yeah. What that just made me realize too is he like the cardinal does. He's kind of got two masters. Like he's got got Thomas and Cromwell, and he's like Thomas is telling him to go like the righteous path to not lead himself into temptation. Cromwell's offering him all the power, and so it's like it's interesting.
And the seduction that Cromwell plays with him throughout the movie is just really so. He was Rumpole the Bailey.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. My dad came in and he watches Rumpole like crazy. My dad is all about British crime and court dramas, and British ones are his cup of tea.
Nice.
But anyway, but Rumpole the Bailey, I'm like, hey, it's Rumpole right when I saw him.
But I mean, his performance, and I was just transfixed by how good. I mean, Schofield gets all the accolades, but in some ways he has the easy job. McKern, by contrast, he has to play the antagonist, and he has to measure up against a role that wins an Oscar. And I feel like acting wise, he goes toe to toe with Schofield. There's an element to Schofield's performance where he's kind of like. You can see why people get frustrated with him because he postures himself being above it. Everyone admires him for it. It's part of what makes his approval such a trophy for Henry to seek, such a prize. But at the same time, there's the sense of he's above bribes, but he's perfectly willing to kind of just casually toss over the cup to Richard Rich and, I don't need this, but sure, if you want something here, I'll throw you this.
I felt like too it was kind of a test. Like it was a test of Rich's character to see it.
Yeah.
For me, it was like I'm going to give this to you. Now I want you to see, and he asked him, are you going to sell it? Or, which the correct answer would have been, no, this is a bribe. I will not take it either. Like, or he chucks it in the river. Like, you know.
Throughout the movie, he never shies away from nice things for stuff.
And I think that's what Moore doesn't really appreciate is he has forgotten or he's never felt what it's like to be that hungry. Whereas Moore can, he's at the peak of his career, but Rich, he's there and he's, he feels. I love that. What would you do with this money? And he says, I'd buy a nicer gown. And it's just he just feels so, so grungy, so impoverished, and where he's in Moore's household, he's engaging in this enlightened banter about utopia at the beginning of it, and yet he feels very much out of place.
Yeah.
He feels like he should belong there. He wants to belong there, but he feels like all he needs. But what he lacks is not the intellectual ability. He lacks the means.
For me, I don't know. It's like I can see I understand where like Rich wants this, but again, it's what's your motivation behind it, right? Because obviously, like
characters are what their decisions are.
Yeah,
and you learn throughout the movie what's most important to him.
Yeah, which is money and power, not comfortability or doing the right thing, which is unfortunate because you could see he's like just on the cusp.
Which is interesting. You mentioned comfortability because that's kind of where everybody else in this movie lives.
Yeah,
like even the Cardinal, he's just like, just go along with it, do the thing.
Yeah. The Duke of Norfolk, Corin Redgrave's character. There's that great line later on where he's hang it, Moore. I mean, we've all just said the oath. Just say the oath. This guy, go along.
Like it means
along.
nothing. Just say it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that conversation too because Thomas again then acknowledges he's not saying that all of them who took the oath are like evil sinners or going to go to hell, but he's saying
sorry, just real quick for the audience, the oath that he takes is to support the king.
It basically has the church leaders accept him as the supreme head of the church.
Right. Which is crazy.
And so they're doing an oath to him, and he's the only one that doesn't take the oath.
And he was showing. He's like, hey, I have this conviction. I'm not saying you guys aren't believers, and I want to see you guys in heaven. And if I don't follow my conviction, then I won't. Right, but then they try to turn it on him. He's like, "What are you saying?
Are you saying that I won't be in heaven?"
He's like, "No,
I don't know your conscience."
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah,
but so we get to Wolsey died, and Henry names Moore,
right.
and sort of this, for me, there's kind of this question about why Henry named Moore, knowing that Moore was against it.
I think it was because he's his friend, and he's like, I
convince him.
We're friends here. We can do this, but he doesn't realize how convicted that Moore is.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about Henry that in Shaw's portrayal that I absolutely love, which is that he conveys Henry. He's kind of like he's a bit of a malevolent child, but he's also supremely confident in his ability. It's like he knows he's the king, but he believes he is. You get that in that great dialogue, which we're getting to, where he's talking with Moore. He talks about he is asking Moore's opinion about this music, and Moore knows it's composed by him, and he says,
"Oh, I hadn't picked up on that." So,
so Moore says, "Well, I know you composed it," and Henry gets upset because he doesn't get. He's like, when people know this, they don't give me their honest opinion. I want your honest opinion. And Moore says, honestly, I thought it was delightful.
Yeah.
And Henry's like, oh, I think your music taste is great. And Moore makes this subtle dig about how I
don't have great music taste though.
Yeah,
and then Henry follows up by saying, well, your taste are my taste.
Yeah.
Not realizing that Moore's kind of dinged him a little bit by that.
I love that scene. So I related to that scene so much as a musician. Like I'm always showing people my music and people say, oh, it's great. And I'm like, yeah, but what kind of music do they like? I'm like, do I like what they like? And if they don't, then it's like,
do they like Taylor Swift?
Yeah, right. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Now I'm actually asking that question of someone who's worried that you might chop their head off.
Exactly, yeah.
if they give you the wrong opinion.
It's funny to see him, because he knows too, like, it's funny to see him kind of abuse that. Like, he starts laughing. He goes, ha ha, and he's like forcing the guys to laugh, and it's kind of getting the kick out of making the guys.
So, but you get this the great scene with his quote impromptu visit to Moore's house.
Yeah,
which I love.
Which is immediately after he becomes chancellor. It's like, hey, buddy. Yeah.
and you get that great dialogue, and it just amazes me how much Bolt does with this scene to convey everything that's going on. And it works. This to me is like the film in a nutshell, where you get the brilliance of the writing, the brilliance of the acting, because you see you have Schofield and you have Shaw, and they're conveying the essence, the gist of it. And Shaw's performance, I just find it so compelling, the idea that he's playing this person who he wants to be Moore's friend. He views Moore as his friend, and yet at the turn of a penny, he's like, I'm the king.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like
he gets literally very loud.
Yes, exactly.
So I love the sorry, we'll get back to that, but I love the shot where the first time he gets really loud, it goes to inside his house, and all the people hearing this conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like that was hearkening back to early in the film when he's talking with the cardinal, and the cardinal starts to raise his voice, and Tom's like people are going to hear, which I feel like the king's trying to abuse that same power he wants. He knows everyone is listening to him. Because the music stops too, right? Like the music's going there, and then he starts yelling. All the music stops. He knows people are listening, right?
Yeah, and you get the impression that one of the things I like most about the scene, though, is he conveys why Moore's opinion matters so much to Henry. Yeah. And it's this great point that it's this great bit of dialogue where Thomas More just asks him outright, then why does your grace need my poor support? And Henry replies, because you're honest. And what is more to the purpose, you're known to be honest. There are those like Norfolk who follow me because I wear the crown, and those like Master Cromwell who follow me because they're jackals with sharp teeth, and I'm their tiger. There's a mass which follows me because it follows anything that moves. And then there's you. It's the fact that because of Moore's stature, we're talking about the man who wrote Utopia, the man who's regarded as one of the greatest lights of the English Renaissance, that if Moore is on board with this, it's a sign of respectability.
Mm-hmm.
And that
stamp of approval,
exactly,
from the most respected guy in the land, basically.
And it's interesting too. He's like thinking about just the history of God. We have like Joseph, we have Daniel. Like God loves to put people in positions of power, like near to the king of the land or whatever, just to kind of give this either advisement to the king or to have his presence there somehow so he can show like what's going on. And it's funny that it's Moore that's that guy who's like the lawyer, the money guy, instead of the cardinal who's supposed to be the guy.
And I thought it's interesting. This is jumping forward a bit, but just his approach. I was going into this movie being like, yeah, you stand up against that king, and he's really downplayed about it. Like at a certain point, he's like, we're just gonna be silent. Like he's not putting on a revolution type thing. Yeah. He's doing the least possible he can to not make waves.
Which is important because if you read the New Testament, it talks about that in like Peter and in some of the like Paul's epistles, where it's like Christians are called they're called to submit to the law, not to obey it, but to submit to authority, which is what he's doing. So he's not calling revolution.
That's true.
He's holding his ground, but ultimately he's going to submit to the king because the king
he's trying to thread this needle that it turns out by the end is unthreadable.
Yeah.
To be fair, that is the film's depiction. That is not what actually happens in history, and we'll get to that in just a bit.
Yeah, interesting.
We'll stick to the film's depiction, but then we'll have.
Yeah, I want to hear the.
We'll get to it because it's actually in the DVD that you have, if you have the Blu-ray.
Okay.
There's a documentary that actually, in which one of the people in it makes the point that about the disparity between the film and what happens in real life, which is a lot more complicated, and also it mitigates that very point that you just made, which is that he didn't keep silent about it.
Okay.
And that is part of what ultimately got him in trouble. But we'll get to that.
Okay, cool.
That would be an interesting version to see. That's the version I was hoping for, where he's more vocal about. I mean, he's very vocal in this movie because it's a play, but
This is one of the things that makes this whole
or outwardly vocal.
This whole moment so incredibly rich, and this is really outside of what we're talking about here. But in the past decade, there's been a lot of attention drawn back to these personalities in the form of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series. And it's a great trilogy of novels. It's been adapted into, I think it's a BBC miniseries. And in those novels, the central figure is Cromwell. And it is as controversial today as A Man for All Seasons was in the 1960s in terms of its partisanship. Because you watch those or read the novels, Moore is portrayed very differently. In effect, a lot of the positive traits that they attribute to Moore, Mantel assigns to Cromwell. But it gets to how you have these interpretations. And I'm going to give you another spin on it, and this is something that's covered in either one of them. When Moore was Chancellor, and the film does not touch on this at all, doesn't even breathe about it. One of the things he does is he persecutes Protestants. He burns them at the stake. And it just fascinates me knowing this, watching this movie about how we're seeing Moore portrayed as this wonderful man of principle, and it completely excludes the fact
Burning guys for their principles.
Yeah, it's from
interesting.
From a Protestant perspective.
Yeah.
He's a bloodthirsty zealot.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that the prospect for the daughter that comes in to be her husband, he's Lutheran, and I'm like, I'd be more on his side.
Yeah.
But the way that this movie frames it, I'm like, okay, that's fine. He disagrees with them. He's like, yeah, you can't marry my daughter unless you're Catholic. But it's like, he seems reasonable. But if I were looking at it from a historical point of view, I'd be more on the Lutheran side.
Yeah,
But,
me too. Yeah.
I mean, and that's another one of the tweaks that Bolt makes is that he was actually married to Margaret, by the way. Margaret herself is a very fascinating figure. And she was, one historian has recently argued that she was in many ways even smarter than her dad. And I like how they depict her as someone who is very much, dealing with as an equal, unlike Moore's wife, who is stubbornly holding on to her literacy, which admittedly, might save her some trouble down the road. But
I love one line in there where after he gets really mad, like the last part where he gets really loud, he's like, "You see, you've maddened me. I hardly recognize myself." And it's like, that's that great thing about his character. He grabs
his dagger too.
Yeah.
Oh, does he? I didn't recognize.
Just kind of like a light threat.
I missed
I
didn't even
that.
pick up on that.
Well, he was holding. I noticed he's like holding it, and he let go, and you see his dagger, and I'm like,
I love that character though. He's not like a mustache twirling villain.
No,
but he is perfectly fine with you and your buddy until you cross him, and then you see the teeth come out.
Shaw captures very well I think the sense of him as this overgrown child. And when he doesn't get what he wants from Moore, he starts throwing this temper tantrum. And as he storms off and gets on his boat, he literally leaves his entourage behind.
Yeah.
And he's gleeful about this. You get Cromwell beginning the process. It's like he senses what's happened, and he begins the process of undermining Moore by beginning the seduction of Richard Rich.
Yeah, and she's like, "You crossed him," and he's like, "I couldn't find another way." And he literally does, like, it's not. He wasn't trying to put up a stand against the king. He was just having this conversation with them, and by the end of it, he's like, "Oh, like my morals haven't changed, and now the king's pissed, and oh crap, everything blew up in my face."
Well, and you get that great dialogue between him and Roper immediately after that scene, which I think is where you best convey what it is that Moore is sticking to, and this is where I really see why it is that this film was as widely regarded as it was, why Schofield's performance is, because it's that Schofield captures this moral rectitude, which is so admirable. And it's where, because what in his mind, he sees it as Henry is forsaking the rules. And in Henry's mind, he can do that because he's the king. Yeah. And, you know, as to quote Mel Brooks, you know, it's good to be the king. Yeah. And so, but he talks about, and Moore does this passionate defense with Roper with the rules. And going back to Roper, it's interesting how he, you know, after he has this meeting with Henry, where Moore stands by his values, he goes back in with Roper, and Roper's, you know, talking about how he's had a change of heart. He's trying to be, he's being a bit flexible. And
Which one is Roper again?
He's the one who's he's trying to marry Moore's daughter.
Okay. Oh, the Lutheran.
Yeah, the Lutheran.
Okay, cool.
And where he's beginning, he's kind of implying he's flexible. He's trying to sort of get on Moore's side, not realizing that by doing that he's kind of, you know,
getting off his side.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a great line in there that I can't remember what it is, but your head is flipped around so many times. We're gonna have to worry if it hasn't flipped around the right way. Again.
Exactly, and it's part of that exchange, and it's followed where we're having this dialogue about it, where you know, Roper can't quite appreciate that this is all the product of Moore's belief that these values, that these rules, you know, have to be respected and have to be adhered to. And there's one point where Roper says to him, so now you give the devil the benefit of the law. And Moore says, well, yes, what would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get after the devil? Roper says, yes, I'd cut down every law in England to do that. And there's this, and this to me is this eternal struggle that we have, which is the idea that, you know, the battle between law and justice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of that sometimes, you know, we know what we need to do, we know what we want to do, and there are these laws in place that prevent us. And sometimes it seems, you know, that Roper is absolutely right, that you need to cut down every law in England to do what's right. And that's basically what Henry is asking, you know, essentially what Henry is asking of Moore. And this is where you get Moore's defense. Oh, and when the last law was down and the devil turned round on you, where would you hide, Roper? The laws all being flat. This country is planted thick with laws from coast to coast. Man's laws, not God's. And if you cut them down and you're just the man to do it, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? Yes, I'd give the devil the benefit of law for my own safety's sake.
So good. Oh my goodness. These lines.
I
wish I was such a good writer as that, where you could take a big, complicated historical thing and boil it down into these.
Yeah, it's so brilliantly done, and it's an expression in a way that is timeless.
Yeah,
I mean, you can apply that to just every situation. Yes, we can ignore the law, but then we ignore law here, ignore law there. We basically demolish the law. Then what protections do we have?
Yeah.
And Moore is saying that he is. It's not just that he's standing by his values; he's standing by the very notion of the rule of law, which Henry is trampling, and
which is this needle that he's trying to thread. He's trying to
follow the law,
but he's trying to obey his moral code at the same point. But they're crossing, and he's got to come to that junction at some point, and there's going to be no room left for him. But.
Yeah, and Moore ultimately, you know, that's where he can never support what Henry is doing.
Yeah,
I mean, if Catherine of Aragon were to pass away, you know, he would have no problem with the marriage to Anne Boleyn.
Yeah,
but if it means demolishing what he's doing, then, you know, he won't stand for it. But we also then get the seduction of Rich. I love the meeting that they have in the tavern, and where he's beginning to pressure Rich. He's sort of offering the carrot of, well, there's this position out here, and
I'm going to give you a nice coach.
Yeah, but it's the line of, you know, where he's trying to probe how malleable Rich is, where he's like, you know, if he says this, would you report it to me? Yes. What if he says it in French? Rich goes, no. And he's like, really? And Rich goes, yes. Sir Rich. Really? It's kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I need you to give way on this to give me. Exactly. He's not interested necessarily in getting the truth. He's interested in getting what works.
That reminds me too of even back before that first scene where he comes up to Cromwell, and it's like this force. It feels like this force of evil just pushes him over. He falls into the mud, and now he's playing in the mud.
I hadn't picked up on that, on the metaphor of that.
He felt so much taller than him in that shot. Yeah, too. I'm like, wait, Rumpel's not that tall, is he?
No, I don't think he is. So, But you also get the impression is to just more he's in a sense he's flirting with Cromwell. He's kind of like, because Moore has blocked his ambitions at every turn. Cromwell is he's offering it, but I love how when get the really you're getting the sense that from Hurt's performance that he's not comfortable with this. It's not like he's decided, well, forget more. He's still trying to find.
He wants the carrot, but he realizes there's moral red tape in the way.
Yeah,
he thinks he can still have it both ways.
Yeah.
That he can still be a moral person while
to go back to your serving two masters metaphor.
Yeah.
He's keeping both feet firmly planted in both.
And whereas he's
split in half.
Yeah.
So.
This is the point where he's kind of like right down the middle. He's agreeing to help Cromwell, but he thinks he could do it on terms that will preserve his sense of truthfulness and respect, and not entirely dishonor Moore.
It's like that saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
that's very good. And I love how they dramatize this in a visual way where every time you see his character again, it's a new fancier coat.
Yeah. That's true.
It's hilarious. It got really hilarious near the end of like, what are you even wearing?
Yeah. Cromwell's now trying to build a case, and it's not just the compromising Moore, it's about undermining his moral standing. And there's that great confrontation with him and Norfolk. And I said he was Colin Redgrave. It's actually Nigel Davenport, where this is where the cup comes up again. And it's an example of how Cromwell is willing to basically use whatever dirt he can dig up to go after him. So you have him saying, Moore accepted bribes, and Norfolk, who's sportsman, is like, he's the one man since Cato who's never accepted bribe. Can you name a judge who quit, who had only 100 pounds to his name and a gold chain? And then he brings in the woman who bribed him, and her, it's all about the case, and Cromwell's like, shut up about that.
He's
Just
like, no,
that's
enough. Yeah.
and so there's like this very thin thing, and Norfolk is.
I love it when Rumpel's character I keep calling him Rumpel, like that's his real name. When he gets angry about stuff, it's like, yep.
Yeah.
He just gets frustrated when his morals don't take him down the path that he wants to railroad him with.
It's really neat. It's an example of and that's what I'm saying, but McKern is underappreciated in this, and it goes back to the scene we already talked about, which actually is still ahead, where you have Norfolk telling Moore to just go along to get along. Yeah. And when Moore says that line, and I'm actually going to dig the line out now because I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, because it's the first part of it that really sells it, where he says, look, we just all said the oath. When he says that, if you watch that scene,
is this his friend that's the guy that...
No, this is when Moore's in captivity and he's being interrogated by the tribunal, which consists of Norfolk, Cromwell, and
is it the guy in the middle
at the house
his
party,
friend,
right?
That he basically is like get lost type thing, because like we can't be friends because you're gonna end up going down with me type thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he succeeds Moore as chancellor.
Okay.
But there's that scene where where Moore's being interrogated. He's been brought from the tower.
Yeah.
And he's being interrogated by the three of them, and Norfolk says the line about hang it, Moore, we all just said the oath. And when he says we've all just signed it to sign it, McKern looks over at him with this glare in his eye, doesn't say a thing, and it passes. But he's acting in the scene. He's not just sitting there letting Davenport act. He's reacting to what Norfolk is saying in the way that Cromwell will, which is that he that's not the script that Cromwell wants, because it doesn't help him in his goal. And it's an example of how McKern is just doing all this heavy lifting, which he doesn't get the appreciation for, in terms of like, he doesn't get an Oscar nomination out of it. He doesn't, he's just seen as the Darth Vader, he's the antagonist, but he is doing such a great job of selling it in a way that doesn't make it, he's not like this mustache twirling.
Yeah. It's very natural, his performance. Like it's just, it almost feels like, I watched him as Rumpel. It's like he's being just as natural as he is being Rumpel, eating his steak and kidney pudding. And like he just feels very natural in the role of it, which is good acting because he's hiding all the work that he's doing.
Yeah. I mean, Schofield is so natural, but it's much more of a classical performance. It's much more. He's what's it called? Where you're just kind of you're declaring he's
like a stage actor, right?
Yeah.
And he's great in the role, and he really conveys the this nobility of Moore in his position and this dignity, and McKern, his comes with approach, but I feel like it's right there. They're on a par. Yet Schofield gets the Oscar, and McKern gets I guess the paycheck from that. So Cromwell tells Norfolk that all Moore has to do is show up at the wedding between Henry and Anne Boleyn, and all this will pass. And there's that great moment where Henry he's celebrating, he's happy, he's married Anne Boleyn, who's as hot as the young Vanessa Redgrave, and he sees someone he thinks is Moore, and he kind of pushes through the crowd, Thomas, and it turns out it's not.
That's so great, and that's the end of the scene too. So it's like the tension of the scene is he going to show up at the party? Yeah. And it's like, oh, he's there. And for him, it's like, oh, he's there. For us, it's like, oh crap. Maybe it's him. What? Don't do it.
Yeah.
And then he turns him around, and it's the wrong guy, and instantly out of the scene, but you feel this wrath coming from him that's going to go through the rest of the movie.
Did they end the scene with Henry's face falling?
Probably,
He walks back, and everyone's like bowing to him. But he's angry.
But he's furious. And again, I think that's the last scene he's in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
That's so
That's
great.
it.
That's amazing storytelling. Of like, you just set him up as this force of nature that comes in and sets up the stakes. And then as soon as the stakes are set, it's like, now it's just and Thomas's journey through the rest of it.
And McKern takes the mantle of antagonist and just runs with it. So.
And it makes you want to see the king for the rest of the movie too. Like every time he's on trial, you're like, is he there?
I love how like the king just isn't there.
Yeah.
Like there's all these people and the king is nowhere in sight.
Yeah.
He's miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's leaving it to his servants to do the dirty work, and the person who's doing that is Cromwell.
And it just feels so much more this is a great great lesson for thrillers of it feels so much more it gives that sense of injustice to the nth degree. And if you can start a thriller with that degree of injustice, like The Fugitive is a great example of doing that. You've got a powerhouse of a plot that's going to pull you through it.
So now Cromwell confronts Moore directly, says that he's a traitor. This is where you get the first line of where Moore makes that offhand comment about Rich's gown, because Rich is there as the stenographer, and how it's also a great marker for how Rich is gradually selling out. It's
just like nice dress. Or I don't know what he said. Exactly. That's what I would.
That's a nice gown you have on. So, but that he's indicating that the king, that by his actions, the king is treating him as a traitor, and this is where Moore is trying to argue the legalities.
Yeah.
He's trying to argue that that he's trying to walk this narrow path by not saying anything. Then you can't be convicted. And this is where you get to the historical inaccuracy of it, because after Moore left the chancellorship, he wrote a lot, and a lot. And while it wasn't as overt criticism of, say, the king is a traitor, so forth, he was making his opposition to Henry's path very clear. So it wasn't just the fact that the king was, and this is where the justice comes from, I think, is the fact that King is trying to bully Moore, even though Moore wants nothing more than to stay out of the arena in the movie. But in reality, Moore was still actively trying to shape events, and in that sense, he was a recurrent problem for Henry, and that's, you totally missed that in Bolt's interpretation. Of course, what Bolt's doing is trying to simplify it to a nice moral tale, and it does it very effectively. But it helps explain why it is, and that the play doesn't capture that you're seeing this persecution of Moore. That in reality it wasn't entirely undeserved, but here it seems as though it
makes more sense.
Well, exactly. In real life, he'd be more like a Martin Luther, like he's outwardly saying these
Yeah.
things of putting up the whatever thesis on the
95
church
theses,
door,
yeah.
and
Yeah. And so in that sense, it's more is a bit more of a nail that needs to be hammered down. But you do have the fact that what you get in the movie,
which I'd love to see that version of it. But
yeah,
that would
and
be,
that's what I say. You could do so many different takes on the story from different perspectives, and tell. And Hilary Mantel did one, and Bolt did one. I imagine there's others that have yet to be written. But we find out that so what Cromwell's doing now is he's setting a trap. And I love this trap, which is that he's going to craft an oath, and this is where you get the sense that Cromwell may not be Moore's equal when it comes to morals or when it comes to the nuances of philosophy and the law, but he is much more effective as a politician. And the trap is that he's going to have an oath that, and you get that great dialogue between Moore and Margaret, where he's like, maybe I can take the oath depending upon how it's worded.
Yeah.
And Cromwell's made sure it's worded in a way where
he leaves them nowhere to run with them.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so because he refuses to swear to it, he's in the Tower of London. And I love the way that they indicate the passage of time, where you get this.
Yeah, and it's the name of the movie of the all the seasons pass outside, and I'm like, hey, look, Man of All Seasons. That's what it is.
He's in prison, like in the fall, he's in the winter. So you get the sense he's in there for a long period of time.
Which I've got a script that I'm just gonna self promote for a second. Anyway, Time Haunt, my feature script is very much about the passage of time. Anyway, but I've got the same thing of it's split into seasons throughout the movie, but yeah, anyway, like it opens with the title of summer, and then it goes into winter, which is of course all of Act 2, and then fall. Oh no, sorry, wait, what? I don't know. Anyway, it ends in spring.
Cool.
And but I do that thing with that. Anyway, back to what we're talking about.
So you're now starting to get to these interrogations, which are where you're seeing more elucidating his position, which is that basically he is not taking the oath, but not taking the oath by itself doesn't mean that he is committing treason.
Yeah.
As he puts it very well, you can't commit treason by saying nothing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
pleading the fifth.
Yeah, exactly. and Cromwell keeps butting his head up against that. And it's nice that he does it in a way to where he conveys, Recurrent conveys Cromwell's frustration, but Cromwell never loses his cool.
Mm-hmm.
Where he never explodes or anything like that. Great little bit of dialogue you have in in one of the interrogation scenes where Moore is dismissively saying to Cromwell, "You threaten me like a dockside bully," and Cromwell says, "How should I threaten?" Moore says, "Like a minister of state with justice."
That's so great. And then he of course gets pissed at that.
Yeah, he says, "Oh, justice is what you're threatened with," and Moore says that I am not threatened. And it's interesting because you get two things conveyed in that exchange. And one is you get the sense on the one hand that Moore's assuredness that, he's on the side of right, and ultimately he'll win out. Yeah. And it's also, though, a sense of naivete that perhaps that he's not aware this is power politics. And at the end of the day, Cromwell will say, will make it happen because that's what the king wants. Yeah. And it matters because it's a question of, does Moore knowingly martyr himself? Or is he convinced that at some point he'll see his way through this because
I think he's convinced of that the whole way through. Like there's actually specifically a line for that when he's talking to his wife earlier on, where he's like, "This is not the stuff that martyr is made of." Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, it will be though. But
that's quite, I'd forgotten that line.
Yeah, I love that aspect of his character, though, the lawyer aspect, where he's good at turning a phrase and knowing the ins and outs of not just wording, but like the law and how things work. That like it's the kind of thing that I wish I was good at, but I'm not.
And yet he doesn't seem to ever fully appreciate that this isn't about law. This isn't even about faith. This is about politics.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that, Cromwell is going to play politically, which is what you ultimately see what happens with Richard Rich, where we get to the big trial, where we have you have the big confrontation, you have Cromwell presenting his case, and you have more darting and dodging, and you have it's great practical power politics in two respects. One is the fact that Rich perjures himself.
Yeah.
And you get that great line afterward of Moore saying, man, sells his soul for the world, but for Wales, because he's become Attorney General.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah.
But then you also have
if I were to just add a thing to his performance there, I'd you can't see it because it's a podcast, but if he's like, but for Wales, and then he does a little eyebrow thing, and then it goes on.
And you can tell Rich is ashamed of it, but he doesn't recant. He just slinks out and goes on with his very profitable life. But then you have the climax, which is after you've had this confrontation, this ongoing confrontation, the case is concluded, the jury gets up to retire, and Cromwell says, well, if your conclusions already know, you can just tell us now, implying that we want to hear your verdict. It's going to be public. And he basically bullies the jury. You can't bully Moore, but he can bully the jury into giving him the verdict he wants. And that's when, of course, Moore says, well, since the verdict is in place, I'm just going to go ahead and have my say. And they get that wonderful speech elucidating his views.
Oh, that's so good. Do you have the speech written down? It'd be great to have it.
I like that part too. I'm like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's so good.
This is what we've been waiting for.
Since the court has determined to condemn me, God knoweth how. I will now discharge my mind concerning the indictment in the king's title.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's like, now that I'm condemned, I'm gonna break my silence here and just and you're like, oh, here comes the shotgun there in the face.
But at the same time, he is not giving up his position. I mean, because you have him saying that it is insufficient to charge any Christian. The immunity of the church is promised, both in Magna Carta, and Cromwell tries to seize upon that, says, now we plainly see you are malicious. And Moore says, I'm not so. I am the king's true subject. I pray for him in all the realm. I do none harm. I say none harm. I think none harm. And if this be not enough to keep a man alive, then in good faith I long not to live. Nevertheless, it is not for the supremacy that you sought my blood, but because I would not bend to the marriage.
Yeah, so basically the arc of his character is he's convicted in his morals, but it's tested at every turn, and it's to the point of death. And it's like, do you believe in this enough that you're going to go to the grave for this? And he's like,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, especially once he's been condemned to the grave, he's like, well, then I'm going to make it's like with that speech, he's embracing his martyrdom.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. This is when he has decided he is going to be a martyr.
That reminds me too of Stephen, like the first martyr in the book of Acts. That's what he does too. He's like, they've condemned him to be stoned, and he gives this whole just amazing speech of the history of the Jews up until Christ. And yeah, so it's kind of like a parallel of that too, which is pretty cool. Ooh, just bumped my mic. I thought it was great how he forgave his executioner and paid him.
Yeah, that's great.
It's like, it's not your fault. You're doing your duty to your state, which is what his whole principle is about, is like serving your state.
That was a very traditional thing to do.
Yeah.
It was that people that condemned, they pay the coin, they forget the executioner. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. So that's good.
But it's the line he says after that I think is really awesome, where he's talking with Cranmer, who's there, and he's telling Cranmer, "Be not afraid of your office. You send me to God." And Cranmer says, "You're very sure of that, Thomas?" And then his last words are, "He will not refuse one who is so blithe to go to him."
Yeah, I love that, and how quick. And then after that, how quick it was. It was like quick, over with, painless. Yeah. And then the credits scroll, and we find out what happened to everybody
depressing
else.
As crap. Yeah.
But it gets to the fact that it gets to the essence of why Moore is doing this, which is, at the end of the day, he is concerned most about being right with God.
Yeah.
And even though he wanted to be right with the king, he wanted to be right with the country, but at the end of the day, it was God who mattered most. So he goes to his death. He's confident that he's basically being condemned for being right with God. So he is worried not in the least about what's going to happen with he knows he's going to heaven for this.
Yeah.
Which is a nice way of finding comfort in what is ultimately something that has been forced upon you, no matter how hard you've worked to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. So that's our review of Man for All Seasons. Now our review of Hacksaw Ridge.
I feel like we're not reviewing a movie here. We're reviewing two movies.
Yeah.
Because you have the first half of the movie, which is about Desmond Doss and his faith.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that kind of makes it one movie is that you have the opening scene where you have this very hazy, you probably know the technical description for what we're seeing, which is that it's this slow motion, this person's being carried away. We're seeing all these concerned soldiers over him. You're very worried.
Well, it's mostly in the audio, and there might be some slow motion in there, but it's mostly you don't hear anything besides his voiceover.
Yeah.
So
He's like, they're carrying him to safety. We don't know why. We're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But we can see in their faces they're very concerned that this is someone who matters to them very much.
And I love the voiceover. Let me grab that real quick. I looked up where the scripture is, and it's Isaiah 40, 28, 31.
Oh, yeah, the NASB translation. Do you not know, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might he increases power. Through use grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly. Yet those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary.
And that's a perfect verse for that one, because that's exactly what he does.
Yeah.
And we'll get there. But the end, starting at the end, and it basically does the thing that we talked about with Maverick the other day. But it starts at the end and then it comes back to there. But him having saved all these people and just one more, and he's just worn the crap out. Like, that's a perfect thing for that.
Yeah.
But then. Yeah.
But first we have to establish who he is as a person. So we go back 16 years.
Yeah.
We see young Desmond Doss growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. He is roughhousing with his brother.
Two little ruffians.
Yeah, he nearly kills him, and this leaves him with the horror of violence. Then we jump to 15 years in the future or so. We see a now adult Desmond Doss played by Andrew Garfield.
Spider-Man.
Which the shot with him hitting him with the brick is like
crazy,
brutal. And that brings up basically it's the counter theme to this movie of danger and violence, and mostly that sense of danger. And I'll bring up when it comes up throughout the movie, but like even in normal scenes.
That scene gripped me. The first time I watched it a couple months ago. But I watched it also last night. But the first time I watched it, that scene was really emotionally gripping for me because when I was young, I got in an argument with my brother all the time. But like one time I had pushed him and he almost got like seriously hurt. And I was like, and my mom was like, you could have killed him. And then it made me realize, I was like, wow.
There was one time I
relate to him in that.
My brother was running after me in the hallway and I turned at the last minute into the door and he hit his head right on the corner of the door, and I felt so responsible for that. But I mean, it was him was chasing me, but I could relate to that moment where he turns and he goes and looks at the like the 10 Commandments thing on the wall. But that was a great way of dramatizing that moment. But for me, it was just like, oh crap, I'm the one, and
you see Cain and Abel, and you're like, wow, like.
Yeah, but
it brings it again. It's like we always think, how could Cain and Abel? How could that happen? And then you see it there. You have these two young kids, and it happens.
Nature. I'd like to point out it was my brother's fault.
You're definitely not. Yours is mine.
Yeah.
I was definitely like. I was being malicious in that. So
well, that aside, it's always the brother's fault.
That's true.
It was the one time where it wasn't the brother's
At least
fault.
you can say you didn't mean to do it, right?
Yeah.
So,
but you feel that guilt either way.
And yet, and this gets to, I have so many issues with this movie, is that I feel like this whole scene gets undermined later on. Because I feel like this does a nice job of setting up who Desmond is. And yet then they have to create an additional reason later on with the whole, conflict, almost killing his dad. Yeah. And it's kind of like, so.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what? Why? We already had this moment. Like, why are we doing it again?
And I think I did some reading up on Doss. I don't think that actually happened in real life. The
gun thing.
The gun thing.
Okay.
I wonder if they added that to. Yeah, because you can.
It's kind of a Go ahead.
Well, yeah, because with the brick you can see, well, he's not violent, but maybe someone could say, oh, well, why won't he touch a gun? Cause
it's kind of a two-step thing of the violence and then the gun. But
I think it. And this goes back to my thing. I don't think that needs to be spelled out necessarily.
I agree with
the
you.
fact that, but Gibson for some reason
didn't really need it. But yeah,
it's another thing I want to say. It's a product of modern filmmaking versus like older filmmaking. Like, unfortunately, like now we have to kind of explain things more to the audience and kind of spoon feed things. And Man for All Seasons is back in a time where you didn't have to do that. So I can see why it's not necessary, but I can see why he would have done it.
And that's such an effective scene. And then when you get, because it's interesting how Gibson does later on when we're talking about the gun scene, is you're getting these flashbacks of the confrontation that he has with his dad. Mm-hmm. And you don't quite process what it's about until you get to that scene where he's explaining it to Smitty on Okinawa. Mm-hmm. And then it's kind of like, so apparently the scene where nearly kills his brother wasn't enough of a deterrent for violence. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you're against violence, you don't have to, it's not like you exempt guns until you have an incident with a gun that includes guns as well.
I mean, I see why they thought they needed it, because violence isn't necessarily equated with guns. I mean, you can use guns for many other things
like
besides
hunting,
killing someone,
which would have been common there. But I think,
I understand your point though. Is like it would have been a nice deleted scene.
I do.
Yes,
I do agree with you though. Of it should have been deleted, because for economy wise, you got it with that one first scene. You got it. Yeah. You don't need
everyone
any more,
gets the concept,
especially the being clever with it, of holding out the reveal of, oh, there's the thing with the gun. It's like, yeah, we already saw that, the brick thing. Like, what?
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
But we quickly move past that. We get to Doss being in Lynchburg. There's, he's, someone's injured. He takes him to the hospital, and this is how he meets Dorothy Shute, Teresa Palmer's character, and they develop their romance. And it's interesting how, and this is one of the things I like about the movie is how he is living in this town during the war, and he is constantly seeing all these signs of the war. And it's the men in uniform. It's people talking about it. He didn't have to go to war. He was in an exempt occupation, but his brother is joining the Navy. So and you can appreciate how it's one of the things I think the film does best, conveying his sense that he needs to join up.
Yeah, and there's a very important moment before he goes to the hospital where he saves a guy's. He's trapped under the car because he's working on it, and the car fell on him.
He saves the guy's leg, basically.
Yeah, but like somebody says, "Oh, you saved his life," and you see that spark in his eyes, and he's like, "I want more of that."
Yeah,
like it's like, oh, okay, I get what this character's about.
Yeah.
So he gets that. He's like, I want to be.
Yeah, first there's the renouncing violence thing with the brick, and then it's like, and you can save lives too. Oh, exactly. That's even better.
And he saved the life with the brick too.
Yes, by propping up the car. You're right.
Did he?
You just made me realize that. Yeah.
I didn't even notice that.
He took the brick and he used it for another
purpose. Bricks can be used for good as well as evil.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, this is, of course, his decision, though, to enlist, even though he is doing it to become a combat mech, really bothers his dad, though.
Sorry, I just want to dig a little bit more into the brick thing.
Go ahead.
It's kind of a redemption metaphor of like, this is the tool of your sin, and now you've taken it and you've done it for something for good.
But his father is just so dead set against that because of his experiences during the Great War. And Hugo Weaving, I mean,
so good.
He is so good, and I feel like he's underused in so many things he does. And this is an excellent example. He does such a great job with this character, which is kind of a one-dimensional character. He's sort of the he's being asked to sort of play the typical PTSD dad, and Hugo Weaving just does it with. It's such a nuanced performance. It's like he's asked to provide X, and he provides X squared. He is so good in this role.
Yeah, he elevates it.
What I realized too is I feel like this is kind of in my own head. I feel like it's like a spiritual sequel to like Is it not No
Same
Country
Man
for
for All
Old Men?
Seasons. No.
All Quiet on the Western Front. I
Okay.
feel like his dad was in All Quiet on the Western Front. They all went out to be great men and join the Great War. And
Yeah.
none of them made it back except for I don't even know if he'd made it back, but that's what I felt like it was like.
No, he dies at the end.
It's like
Sorry,
it's like
spoiler for All Quiet on the Western Front.
You did say there were spoilers.
There were
That
several
movie's-
versions, and the first one was made in like the 30s. Or
that 30s version. I was shocked how like gripping it was.
Yeah.
Sometimes old movies can feel a bit like the action's not the same, but it's good. Anyway, but I felt like his dad was kind of. Anyway, it's like continuing that kind of, we're going to war, we want to do good things, and so he's bringing that aspect into the film.
And then we have the first date scene with him and the nurse, and I love how they do this when they walk out of the theater. There's constantly cars passing by, almost hitting them. That sense of danger, and it's setting up for the war thing, but also playing with the theme of violence and danger. That has with the brick and the car falling on him and all that stuff. Yeah. And it's just this sense of danger is constantly present in this movie.
And he's always rescuing people from it.
Yeah.
It even puts them apart, right? Like he's trying to cross over. He almost gets hit to go see her. Right? That's kind of cool.
But what he's trying to do is he's trying to walk this line where he is going to cooperate, but on his own terms.
Yeah.
And everybody in the film seems absolutely obtuse to this distinction.
Yeah.
And it's to me it's part of the frustration, which is that
even my brother was obtuse to it, maybe intentionally obtuse just for joke's sake. But he's like, "Oh, it's that one where he goes to the war and he doesn't want to use a gun." It's like, yeah,
I mean, I get why they don't appreciate it at first, but it's like they're people, and this gets to the Chris I was sharing with Aaron before we recorded this about how it's like they come to appreciate what Doss is doing, and then they forget it so they can appreciate it again.
Yeah,
they're constantly having to
get
rediscover
there. Yeah.
how constantly have to realize what Doss is really about.
But yeah, before we get, there's a couple things I want to cover before we get into the military. So the scene at the dinner table with the dad, the uniform story.
That's a great scene.
It's so good. Like just using that uniform thing as a metaphor, and he messed up his uniform, and it's like, whoa, like that's, and the sense of danger and violence, and just, I guess the horror of war, which we'll see later.
Yeah.
But
something I noticed that scene too, which I didn't notice the first time, is Desmond winks at his brother. I didn't see that at first.
Oh no,
he
I didn't
winks
see
at him.
that.
So he's
at
like,
what point?
Like when he's like, "Get out of my sight," and the brother gets up to leave, and he looks at the brother and he does a little wink.
Oh, okay.
She's like, "I'm on your side," which I think before I was like, "Oh, maybe he's still considering it," or it looks like at that point he had decided already he was gonna follow in his brother's footsteps.
Oh yeah. So the other aspect to that scene is the brother. In fact, this is the start of the scene. He's in uniform and he's like, "I'm going to war," and the dad's like, "No, like don't do that."
Yeah.
And the mom's also against it, but that's where Desmond is won over for, I need to go to the war too. And then I love this scene where he talks to his dad in the cemetery, and this is where like just where you set a scene can set so much subtext for it. It's among the graves of his fallen comrades. And he says to him, and I very much relate to this because I'm very much the same way. As Desmond, he's like, "You got to sit and pray and think about everything. You can't do that in war." And I'm very much a sit and think and pray when you need it.
Yeah.
Very much silent prayers all the time when I need them at work and stuff.
Well, Desmond ultimately proves him wrong.
Yeah.
As we get in that the beginning of the climactic scenes. So
it's cool too. It's like it's like you're getting so much parallel with the Old Testament. It's like King David, right? He's this king who's fearless and leads them into battle multiple times. When even people on his side are like, "How are we gonna fight?" The mosquito bites, samurai, whatever, whatever team they're, whatever tribe they're fighting. But he's always like, "We've got God on our side. We're gonna do it no matter what." And so, yeah, it's cool to see. It's kind of cool to see this. he's like, you're just gonna sit and think about it and pray, and that's making me excited because I'm like, yeah, it's gonna work for him.
It sets up the tension for the movie.
Yeah.
Of like, yeah, it goes against his nature. Everything in this, and the Act 1 is so good of setting this up. I think Act 1 ends. No. It goes through to the midpoint. So the whole first half of the movie, just setting up like that his nature is so counter to this system of how things are set up.
Yeah.
And yet, while it's against his nature, what we see in the training is that he's good at it. And you get that with like the obstacle
And
course.
were he to take up a gun, he'd probably be very good at that too.
Yeah. Is that he's sort of a natural at this.
Yeah.
That he's athletic.
And he's even better than the best of the best guys that really wants to go to war and do the conventional thing of using a gun and being a soldier.
And that just reminded me too. I feel like maybe it's because of his upbringing. They kind of set that up. The movie starts with him. He's like chasing and racing with his brother. They're climbing rocks, and he's I guess they start that with the kids. They're climbing that ridge. Yeah, that's kind of cool. A cool parallel there.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that he excels at it. We also see how he has a certain, I don't know if maturity is the quite word, but he has a certain perspective so that when the Sergeant Howell, Vince Vaughn's character, is doing the obligatory marching up and down, kind of dressing down all that.
I thought it was so clever though, like just the writing of it's not just rote. Sorry, this is a tangent, but it's not just the rote drill sergeant thing of you pipsqueak, you blah blah blah. They're very clever little jabs and things. But anyway,
every good war movie has to have that scene. Like, so you better do it right.
I think they did this one to the nines.
I just feel that ever since Ermey and Kubrick did it, Full Metal Jacket. It's everything since then has been kind of derivative.
Yeah.
I mean, and to be fair, I mean, they didn't exactly originate because you can go back to like, Louis Gossett Jr., Officer and a Gentleman, and so forth. Yeah.
All Quiet on the Western Front, which I think is the coolest twist on it because it's like their mailman.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What's up, mailman?" He's like, "What did you call?"
Yeah.
And of course, right before this dressing down of all these guys, a guy gets a knife thrown in his foot. That's what I'm talking about with the sense of danger always being present. It's like you could get stabbed in the foot at any moment. Like, yeah.
I have to ask, did the two of you find Vince Vaughn believable in this role?
Vince Vaughn for me is always Vince Vaughn, no matter whatever role he plays, which I love that. I love that about him. Like, oh, it's Vince. It's like a comfort.
Yeah.
Vince Vaughn's like a comfort for me. So yeah, he reminds me of like a coworker having, it's Vince Vaughn. So he did a good job.
I don't know. I didn't think about convincing, but he sure as heck is entertaining.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And he's not that, because it's Vince Vaughn. I feel like he's not that scary, but I think it works. I think it's like, it's like the difference between like Full Metal Jacket and this is it's like, yeah, he's chastising them, but it's kind of a more fun and like a brotherly way.
Well, it's definitely more understated. I mean, and I think I think that worked. I feel like Vince Vaughn understood that he was never going to be believable as sort of the Ermey,
like the stern,
Louis Gossett Jr. Like screaming at them.
He's more of a clown,
but so he's going to undersell it and be more sarcastic, like why is there a knife in your boot type of thing,
and not even addressing the naked man in the room.
I know, and that's such again seeing it a second time. That's such a great misdirection where
it's so he goes up to the naked guy and you can tell like
in Hollywood
he's like, what is going on? And he's like, what's that knife in your foot?
And it's just the look of Hollywood's face too is like, does he not notice I'm naked right now? Like,
I think he's like intentionally not paying attention, so he'll be that much more embarrassed about it.
Yeah,
I mean, he works for me, but at the same time, I just was like,
I love it. I don't know. I just was on board.
I was. I mean, I thought he did a decent job at it.
It gives it it sets up the crew, even though they're all fighting. Like again, I want to compare it to like Full Metal Jacket because that's such the opposite of this despairing, like horrible. And then you have the one, I forgot his name. Is it Pyle who goes rogue?
Yeah, Vince D'Onofrio's character.
It's like the opposite. It's like, yes, there's chastisement. They're beating each other up, but there's this sense of like they're like a family kind of. There's this kind of coziness in it, and it's like I don't know. It reminds me like I used to play football. It's like being on the football team and like. And I think that's great emotionally to set up for when they're about to go into war.
You have to wonder if that was a little premature in that scene, because that's the scene where they're all coming together. That's the intro scene.
Yeah,
and yet you still have, and you know, it's kind of like they're bonding even before they go through the bonding experiences.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've got to have that because it does the perfect thing of it sets up here are the chess pieces, and I'm very bad at keeping track of. Like in Ocean's 11, Ocean's 11 does a great job, but like
ensemble,
ensemble cast. I'm very bad at keeping track of lots of characters.
It's hard because you have to make each character kind of distinct.
But it did a great job of like, here's Corpse. He looks like a corpse.
Well,
and it's
Ghoul.
Yeah. Oh, Ghoul. Sorry.
Yeah,
Ghoul.
They are all distinct, and
that's where I have to take issue. I thought they were so indistinguishable. It's like there was Ghoul, there was Smitty, and I only remember Smitty because one, they keep giving him so many close-ups of him kind of, trying to act, his gradual acceptance of DOS. But it's like all these other guys were just so indistinguishable. So when you get to Okinawa, and they're all falling like nine pins, they're sitting around later. They're like, oh yeah, this guy's dead. This guy's dead. I'm saying. And who were they?
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's kind of inherent in war movies that they're all wearing the same uniform, and all you've got is this little area to identify them by. I was pointing to my face, by the way.
It's really the contrast. Again, I go back to the scenes of Full Metal Jacket, Biloxi Blues, where they are much more distinctive. And I felt like there was Smitty, there was and then there was a bunch of other guys who basically, it's not just they looked the same, it's just it was all the same banter, it was all the same horseplay stuff. The only thing that really makes Smitty stand out is that when you're getting the scene later where they're assaulting Doss, is that he's the one saying, guys, I'm trying to sleep here.
Yeah.
But he's being beaten up by like 5 NPCs. There's Doss and Smitty, and everybody else.
I guess there's like 3 of them that are very distinctive.
Yeah, which I think is. I mean, yeah, I get it. I get maybe there could have been more distinction, but it's hard to focus on that many people too. So the fact that we have at least we have Ghoul, we Smitty. Vince. I'm just gonna call him Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn and Hollywood. And I would say that even there's probably one more guy, but those definitely were distinct enough. And
you know what makes Hollywood distinct? He's the one with the mustache.
Yeah. And showing up naked in your first scene is make you remember him.
But you're going to forget that when he puts on the uniform, but the uniform won't cover the mustache. So that's how you remember him.
So. And then we get very quickly into the scene where he's got all the guns on the rack. He says, this is your lover, your mistress, your concubine. It's interesting that he added concubine because that adds the element of sin to it.
Yeah.
And that's, if he were to embrace that, that's what it would be for him. So
I love that.
And I do love how they did that, where he tells them all to get the guns, and then Hal looks over and there's that one gun remaining.
Yeah. Oh, that's so perfect storytelling.
Right
it's like, it's just subtext of like, there's one gun. It's like, oh, we know whose gun that is. Yeah.
And the way they deal with this is where this film is just loaded with inaccuracies in terms of the way they represent the story. And one of them is how they portray going after Doss. And this to me is one of the pet peeves, because it gets to, I think, what for me is part of the problem of this film, which is, I think, what grabs Gibson about Doss, what motivates him, isn't Doss's pacifism. It's his religious belief.
Yeah, his faith. Yeah.
His faith.
I thought it was bizarre in the psychiatric scene. He's like questioning his praying, and it's like, lots of people pray, dude.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like,
I will go there though. I've experienced that before though. It's like some people are like, oh, I've had conversations with God or hear God, and they're like, what? You hear voices? So I have experienced that, so I can relate to that scene.
Yeah, but I get the thing where he's like, do you hear back from him?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Well, no, you get a general sense of, I don't know.
But they're treating it as though he somehow is the only Christian in America.
Yeah, it is bizarre.
Tell me about this God. Where exactly does he?
Yeah.
Well, everywhere, you say.
Yeah.
Everywhere and nowhere. Yeah.
I would agree with the physician, but I would disagree in the sense of like the other they do bring up the fact that they are men of faith too, and I think the reason they're angry with Doss is not necessarily because of his faith, but it's because
they're holding it over, or he's holding it over them.
Yeah, it's like they both believe in God in a sense, but he has a certain conviction. His certain conviction is, I can't hold a gun. That's sin for me.
Yeah.
And so you have the other guys who are like, well,
Divorce is sin for him.
huh?
Divorce is sin for him. Or I don't know
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you're
Well,
going.
it's like the same thing
yeah.
with Thomas is like that. It's a sin. It's a sin for him to claim the king as the head of the church. That would be sin for him to claim, or even approve of the divorce or even the remarriage. And so, like you have these two men of faith. One has a certain view. His view is a very reasonable view. It's the view of most people in the army, is that they're going to fight and defend their country. Even the psychiatric, he does say it's like, well, that wouldn't be considered murder. It's I would say they're mad at him because it's like the pride thing. It's like, oh well, I believe the same thing as you, but you're trying to. They feel attacked in their faith because he's trying to live out his.
Yeah.
When he's not trying to attack anyone's faith, he's just trying to live out.
He's saying, this is my conscience.
This is my
But I feel that all of that is
It's-
exaggerated because Gibson does not want to engage directly with justice pacifism. It's like because Gibson himself, I feel as though, what matter. This is where I think Gibson relates to Doss in terms of the faith. He doesn't relate to Doss's pacifism.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I feel like he wants to make it about. So he has all the. It's like we glossed over this, but the earlier scene where he first has the Bible, and they're kind of. It's almost like I kept expecting one of the characters to say, "What's a Bible?"
Yeah.
So Gibson makes it more about the faith itself rather than the pacifism. Yeah, I got
and I think I understand. I think that's fair though, in the sense of, for me, because it wasn't about the pacifism, it's about the faith. Because I understand both points. Is these guys believe in God, they're going to war, they're going to defend their country. They're not going there to murder. And Desmond over here has the same.
He's
belief,
this parallel
but his-
track, but he's this.
He I don't want to touch a gun. I want to go to war. I want to help. I want to fight the enemy. I want to fight evil. But I'm going to do it out because I don't believe in killing, right?
Yeah.
And so
And it's interesting that there's a parallel with more of the conscience thing of he's like, he doesn't want to force it on other people. In fact, there's the line where he says, it's like, oh, am I not going to heaven? He's like, I don't know your conscience.
Yeah.
So,
But this gets to what I think is the second act, which is once he's announced his conviction, and once the campaign by Howell and their CO, Jack Glover, Sam Worthington's character, to discharge him as a Section 8 fails, they begin this campaign of harassment.
yeah,
Now, Doss was harassed,
yeah,
but it was never at the level.
it was never sanctioned.
He was never assaulted. There's no evidence that he was ever assaulted. He never claimed he was assaulted. Like the scene that you have where he's beaten.
with the
He was never court-martialed. That entire court-martial sequence is a fiction. There was a point at which
It makes great storytelling.
There's a point where someone did threaten him with the court-martial, and then another officer instantly said, "No, we can't court-martial for this." You're right. It's great drama, but again, it plays. I feel like it's in there not just because it's drama, but because it plays to Gibson making this about he is being persecuted for his faith. Because you have all these people there that are basically saying you're not following this order, and it kind of is broadly about what he believes and not specifically about his pacifism. So in a sense, it's almost like he's on trial for being a Seventh-day Adventist. And it's not that.
Well, he kind of is, because isn't that the tenet of Seventh-day Adventists of no killing?
Well,
no war. That's where the pacifism
definitely
comes from.
definitely working on
So-
Saturdays is not. They follow the Jewish Sabbath. So
And they weren't allowing them, like, they weren't I don't know if this is historical, but they weren't allowing him to, he wasn't allowed to practice the Sabbath on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I get, and I think I get. I actually agree with them. It's like, well, if the enemy's going to attack on Saturday, you have to fight, which he did, and he did, and that's. And
Well, I love the
think he did
tension of
too.
it, though. When we get there, I'll point it out, but I love how they play that.
Yeah,
But it's not just the fact that they have the court martial scene. It's when they have it's like in the lead. For one thing, he was never when he was denied a pass. It was never about. He was not about to marry Dorothy. That was again done to up the stakes. So you had that scene where she comes in and she's trying to convince him to budge.
So if he wasn't, what kind of, if he wasn't court-martialed, then was it just more of like what kind of opposition did he face then?
Well,
what
he faced a lot of, Doss, we want you to do this. It was basically a lot of verbal pressure. It was a lot of peer pressure, and it was. And like I said, there was that one threat of the court martial. He was denied the furlough, but the furlough denial comes from the fact it was blocked him from seeing his brother before his brother went off to serve in the Navy. So there was that type of pressure.
Okay.
But they upped the stakes by he's not being denied an opportunity to see his brother. He's being denied an opportunity to marry his wife.
Yeah,
and so we could
that.
bring her in and have her trying to convince him to compromise his faith. In order to have this,
It's basically the same thing as Moore.
Same thing when they bring his family, and I really
just
that
in
was
the first act. So they're really ramping it up on him in the first act. Storytelling wise, I love the crap out of it though. Like it just.
It is. But but again, I feel like it's designed to make it more about his faith and his pacifism.
Yeah, and I think, and it's the same thing I'd say with Moore too, right? You have these. Maybe they're embellishing certain things that didn't happen, or leaving certain things out, and what's the point of the story? It's like it's this: you have a conviction of your faith, and you need to live out that conviction.
And I love that it sets up the strength of his conviction right at the end of the first act, where we know solidly this is who this guy is.
Yeah.
And you really need that for this story because it just gets into the hell of war. In the second act, and once you get into there, no time for storytelling here. We're just meat grinder.
People
so
are dying,
yeah.
But you get the whole melodrama of not just his dad showing up with the letter from his former CO, who's now conveniently a general, but you have him doing so in his First World War uniform, wearing the medals.
I was thinking about that. I was like, man, it's good he didn't gain that much weight. Like,
yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I'm like, there's no way I fit in that.
Because which might have been a bit more touching, but at the same time also would look ridiculous. Him trying to squeeze 200 pounds of man in a 140 pound uniform. So. But of course, this is where and they make it. It was the phrasing of the letter, which is that basically that his beliefs were protected.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that there's this. It's basically a First Amendment call out.
Yeah.
And yes, it's tied to his pacifism, but again, it's Gibson I think is blowing the line to make it about what he wants it to be about. Mm-hmm. So, but again, that's just my take on it. So,
yeah, that is a fine distinction, but I do see it. So, yeah.
And then you get the leap in Okinawa, and this is my another real grievance I have with this movie because I've already talked to Aaron about this, which is that they didn't go straight to Okinawa from basic training. They actually were deployed first to Guam, and then they were deployed to Leyte. Yeah. And in those two deployments, Doss earned 2 Bronze Stars.
Oh, wow.
So you have two things. One, these men had already seen combat. Not necessarily all of them in Okinawa because you had replacements. But this was a unit that had already experienced the war in the Pacific by the time they reached Okinawa. And secondly, Doss had already demonstrated his bravery.
Ability, his bravery. Yeah. Okay.
And this gets this pet peeve I have, which is like...
You've got to have that journey, though. And you've got to have it in the... Besides just doing those 2 campaigns in a montage, I can't see storytelling-wise how they could have included that.
Yeah, it would have made it worse because you don't have that setup.
And that would end up on the editing floor, too. Yeah.
So. But, it's such a bad thing because the tonal shift in the movie.
It is a big tone. I didn't realize that until yesterday. It's a big shift, especially.
I think
in the
it
violence,
intentionally hits you in the face,
which is
I don't agree with the overabundance of it that Gibson seems to like. I mean, just look at Passion of the Christ. But I don't like that. Like just to give you my perspective on Jesus movies, like that's probably one of the most violent things that's ever happened.
Yeah.
Of course, historically it's happened to many, many people, but he's the most famous one that's happened to. That's a complete sidebar, but
no,
I like my Jesus movies to be as bloodless as possible because it's not about the actual gore of it. It's about what happened there.
Yeah.
So
I understand. I was gonna say I disagree in the sense of, especially the Passion. I like for someone who I didn't grow up in the faith, but seeing that film and how horrible of a death he did die for us. Mm-hmm. Is why I like that film, and I think that's more of. I think he's a Catholic too.
I did have a friend
so
that had that experience, and he's Catholic,
and it's more the Catholic perspective. They're very focused on the sacrifice Jesus made for us,
but
the physical
sacrifice,
gotcha.
and
then more the spiritual what it means,
and tying into Hacksaw Ridge, it's a lot. It's a bit much at points too, and I agree with you.
Yeah,
but
especially
I think
those first couple deaths.
I think that's what makes it. Again, it's like so. You feel like you're in the war zone. You're experiencing what the soldiers.
Yeah, I agree
even if
with
it's
that.
Not historically accurate.
I just don't agree with if like the way that I've talked about it before, and it's actually in the mission statement for Transcend Entertainment. I use PG-13 rating like a razor to cut off the fat that you don't need.
Yeah, I
would say the overabundance of. Saving Private Ryan's a perfect example. That's gory and like it's the horror of war. But they don't indulge in it with the way that I think Gibson likes to in his movies.
And I also think that reflects the fact that there is an element of sadism in Gibson's filmmaking that I think has grown over time. I think it's there as far back as Braveheart.
Apocalypto is a perfect example.
And I think you see it in Hacksaw Ridge, which is that there's a way to do the violence without the lingering.
Like to give an example, perfect example of my approach to movies, and Christopher Nolan for the most part does this too. Of in The Dark Knight, the Joker does some horrible things. Yeah. But it's off screen. Like he gives him the scars, but as soon as he puts the razor up to his mouth,
you don't see it. Yeah.
Cuts away immediately when it starts.
Which makes it more horrifying because you have to.
It's in your mind. And
I think the most horrifying scene that I can recall off the top of my head from that movie is the scene where he drives the pencil into the face of the one of the guys who's like come to throw him out of the meeting with the gangsters.
Yeah,
and it's bloodless. It's very sudden.
Yeah, you don't even see it. Like like the way that they do it is perfect example of why it's bloodless because it's. That pencil wasn't even there on that table. I can guarantee you. They got a shot of the pencil on the table, then they just had him slam his head on the table.
Even
and
the scene
composited them together.
Where Harvey Dent has his face burned off it's graphic and the CGI afterwards is really.
But it's not overindulgent though, is what you're saying. Yeah.
And whereas
it's just enough to get the point across. So
I'd say too, it's like coming from Tarantino though, which is like.
Yeah, I'd say
indulgent to the heads exploding. It's not that indulgent. It feels more real, even though it is a lot.
I'd say that, but Gibson is kind of straddling the line of I don't know. I don't want to judge him as conscience-wise. Ironically, with our stuff. But it's like the man I don't know what his personal spiritual belief is about gore and stuff. Like that's. Like just to give an example, for me, I'm LDS. Yeah. Okay. So our line is R rating. Like you don't watch R-rated stuff.
Okay.
I'd watch this. I mean, like I found that I find things that are acceptable for me, and this is not LDS doctrine at all, but for me and other adult Mormons, I don't know. It's I don't want to say too much because I don't want to say, oh, kids, it's all right. But war movies is like it's the horror of war. Yeah. There's a line to be drawn though of like head blowing up in your face.
Or the entrails spilling out.
And they have entrails spilling out in Saving Private Ryan, but it's not overindulgent. It's somewhere in the background. It's like, yeah, there's some horror of war right there.
Gibson's camera lingers.
Yeah.
And that to me is where I see a sadism.
I don't want to judge his conscience, but there's a bit of bloodlust there that I see.
Including the climactic scene, as we'll get to. Which I've already expressed my complaint about that one to you.
You could be right. The only reason I'm saying again is I didn't feel convicted in it. Is it may seem lingering, but it didn't seem exploitive in the sense of this is what happens in war. This is the truth. I
agree that the approach is my distinction is, and I know what you think about it, but I'm kind of the middle ground between the two of you guys. Yeah. I agree you need to see the horror of war for this story to work.
And I do agree.
He indulges in it to an abundance that I don't like.
I think you and I are closer than you think. You're not between me, because I agree. The horror needs to be there. I think that, and I think that we've seen and this gets to, I think, how defining Saving Private Ryan has become, which is the degree to which you have that level of horror, which has been duplicated very successfully, I think, in Band of Brothers, The Pacific, Letters from Iwo Jima, where you can convey that without it being quite so gory.
Yeah.
And it might be the stylization of it too, like the Zack Snyderization of it, for a lack of a better term. But okay, let me see if I can bridge this gap here. Unless,
I was going to add that what I think what Gibson does is like, he wants to do that, but he only knows how to do it a certain way.
Yeah.
And so he's doing it the way he's trying to do it.
It's his own inclination. You can see even as far back as Braveheart, you've got like the, is it the king or it's some person gets his head smashed in.
Oh no.
And it's like, he lingers on it.
Yeah. And that's why that's why I'm kind of defending it, because I can see where his perspective is.
If I were to depict that, I'd show it behind the head for just as enough frames as you need to show what's happening.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I'd say, like, if we're gonna go, like, it's legal for him to do, right? He's like, he could do this.
Oh yeah, none of us are arguing that.
No, I know, but like,
there is the R rating.
He may not be convicted about how he's portraying it. Some others may. But what I'm saying is, I wouldn't say he's contradicting his faith in any way by portraying this kind of violence.
Yeah, no, it's not that either.
And so that's where I'm defending him in the sense of his.
If he were LDS, that he very much would be.
But then if he's just going by the Bible, like you know the Book of Judges, where there's literally a scene where, what's her name, shoves us.
Is he Catholic?
I think he is Catholic.
He's super Catholic.
And there's a scene in the Book of Judges, right, where this lady drives a tent spike into a guy's head. So even the Bible is not shying away from violence, right? Well, it's a book. It's a descriptive book, not always prescriptive, and so.
Of course, film is subjective, and it's hard to draw that line.
Yeah,
but let me see if I can bridge this gap here. Dang, I had it. I've got it. Just give me a moment. The way that it handles the death of the Japanese soldiers is not overabundant or overindulgent at all, except for the one you're going to point out. Which
when
we get to it.
I agree with. I think I agree with you there too.
I actually.
Which that one is actually more tasteful than I thought it was going to be.
I would actually point to another one, which is
we're alluding to the Suppaku. The purpose, I think, for not overindulging on the violence with the Japanese soldiers is because you see the horror of war, like gory deaths of U.S. soldiers.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the Japanese ones, he was surprisingly basically with my taste of what I would do with an R-rated movie. He indulges with it for the U.S. soldiers, and I think the reason for that is for him, and I don't like watching those, and I think you're not supposed to, and if you do like watching that, that's the issue.
Yeah,
but I think he likes making it is the problem. Is what we're pointing out.
He's enjoying making it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I could see where that's. I would be if he's enjoying that.
It's more like a horror director approach is what he's doing.
And I feel like you can make the movie in a way that conveys the pacifist message that war is hell, and you don't need to indulge in that level of it. That is him that's Gibson being Gibson.
Yeah.
Which,
I
I
agree.
That's, if that's the film he wants to make, more power to him. But then I feel like at some point it's like he's less talking about the horrors of war and talking about, isn't this gory?
Isn't this so cool? This kill, yeah.
Like,
Well, I didn't get that. I just saw it as horrific. I was like, it made me sick.
That's why it works for me. You've landed on why it works for me.
Yeah.
Like you feel the horror of war like you would for Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or any other one where it's gory, but it's to the point of showing this is what war is like.
Yeah.
But that's why it works, because you get the through line of this character who the very thing he's against is this violence and this he's comes up against the worst thing he possibly can as a character right at the midpoint. These horrific deaths.
But this is where it doesn't work.
Then the through line we'll get there. I know what you're gonna say.
No, I don't think you do. So.
Oh, do you? Okay. Well, just let me finish my point and then we'll get there. And it goes through to the end of he doesn't. Well, I know a point that you're gonna bring up against this, but he doesn't take up a weapon all the way through. And so he's a flat out character. Both these guys are flat out characters. Yeah. They don't change all the way through. Captain America, Superman, Paddington, even those are. Oh, I just spoiled our Captain America Paddington episode, but whatever. Yeah. They're flat out characters.
Yeah, and I'll just agree. But I think what deprives it for me is we are at the beginning of Act 2.
Well, we're actually at the midpoint.
We're at the midpoint, but it's like the entire. It's like if it had been just like a climactic scene, or maybe like let's say they had done the scene where he's in combat, and then maybe like the third act would have been him at home recovering, then the gore would have worked. But it's like when the second half of the movie is this exercise in cinematic sadism, it deadens me after a while. After a while, I feel like
I saw the sadism in the certain depictions of graphic deaths. But okay, so if I were to vid angel this movie, which I am going to, just for my mom's sake of watching it, there's certain deaths I'd cut out or cut around or do a different way. But the point of them worked for me of like, it's like a Saving Private Ryan landing on that beach and oh my goodness, this is hell. It needs to be in that hell, and he can't go home at this point just structure wise because he's got to have the pressure on him all the way up to the end.
And that makes sense, but then you don't need to lard on
I agree. I'm going to say I agree with your point.
And I'm going to agree with you too, but I also understand where he's coming from. I disagree in the sense of I don't see it as sadistic in the fact that he's getting a kick out of it. I really do think that he's trying to show the horror and violence of war, because literally, I mean, Desmond is in hell. I mean, he's going through hell. His friends around him are dying. But what's so great about utilizing that graphic violence is to show God's grace in it and how God is moving and how God is allowing him to go and save
I think
others.
He could have done that with like 40% fewer deaths.
You could, well, I don't know.
It would have made the deaths more impactful. There's so much that happened.
Okay, we're getting into the murky, subjective territory. Yeah. I'm going to say the distinction here is there's the audience way of seeing it, which both of us saw it from the audience perspective. And you got caught up in, oh, this is horrible what this director is doing, which I agree with. But it's also in the sake of the story and the through line of it, the audience can experience it without that.
But what I also think about what he could have done alternatively, which is that if he had built up the characters in the first act in basic training, that would have made their deaths more impactful. And this goes again back to Saving Private Ryan, is that when you see, Caparzo and Mellish and all these people dying over the course of the movie, it's because they're distinctive characters you've identified with. When they're dying in the initial, in all these assaults, with the partial exception of Smitty.
You don't even know who's dying. I think that's what you're getting.
I would say all the characters that were established distinctly were not killed in that first
So we're getting very deep into
Well,
this, I think the distinction you're saying is it's not a lingering, oh, this beloved character is dying. It's boom, that guy's gone.
But that's how it really is, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like I couldn't tell you which of the characters who died in the initial assault were ones.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
And so it's basically like watching a bunch of NPCs die. And if you're trying to sell, and this is how I think most films sell the horror of war, which is that they make you care about these characters and they die.
Yeah.
The only the only 4 characters we're even remotely caring about are Doss, to a degree Smitty, who's only really developed fully once they're like the whole.
Okay, this comes into the lack of I wouldn't say lack of the fallibility of the storytellers more than it does intentional. Not caring about the characters, I'd say.
You know, and that's my point. Is that? But it's like absent that, it feels as though Gibson can compensate with the visuals of war, and that only gets him so far.
So are you saying like he's making up for the lack of character development with kind of the violence and the action?
or that he deliberately prefers to focus upon the violence because that's what he thinks his strengths are, or that's what he wants to do. And whereas in doing so, he loses what is admittedly the more common, but also I would argue the more effective approach, which is to make us care about the characters. I mean, it's like you feel Doss's suffering when he is wounded more than you feel the deaths of all these characters that we supposedly have seen throughout. Well,
you've been with him more too, if he's the main character. But I'm just gonna say that this sequence went on for about as long as we've been talking about this.
Yeah, it did. I realized that last night too. It could have been
12 minutes.
Could have been
by
shorter.
Screenwriting. I mean, I think it's necessary, but I mean, I agree with you. It could have been cut down, but we do need to be smacked in the face by this thing.
Yes.
And it smacks the crap out of you.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
So, but yeah, you do get the effectiveness of the attack, and you get there's a very.
I just say if I were to do this, I'd use that PG-13 razor some places.
I would agree. I would probably go the same process.
But yeah. So I think this speaks to your distinction of the part where he saves Smitty is so effective because that character the best of all these men.
Yeah.
And that's I think what you want for all of the men. But again, like filmmaking, you might be able to do that in a novel, but filmmaking is a very finite.
But again, I feel like that had already been done to a degree already at basic training, and we're just starting all over again. So, but again,
I also wonder.
We've kind of. I feel like we've talked that when we have these positions.
Yeah,
we kind of quite agree
so
upon,
we're at the end of this foxhole scene.
Yeah.
And very interesting conversation. Some of it might be in the bonuses, but that whole discussion, though, I think I'm going to keep in full, or I might trim it. But anyway, going on.
Speaking of novels, the movie's based on a novel called, The Conscientious Objectors. I wonder what.
And nobody's going to go to the movies for that. But yeah,
I know. I wonder what Gibson took inspiration from, or what he left out, or what the writer did.
Yeah. My understanding was that he took it actually from a documentary about Doss, and I think that's where they also got some of the clips that they used at the.
Oh, at the end of the movie. Yeah. Okay.
So, but I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. That's kind of a parallel to Interstellar, where they used the documentary footage from the bowl. What is it called? Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But it's in the foxhole scene, of course, that we find out that that Doss's aversion to guns actually comes from not from what happened as a youth, but this confrontation he has with his drunken dad,
which I do think that's an important distinction. I'd have to rewatch it to see how it works and if it would lose anything if you cut those. But yeah, I do get your point though.
Yeah. So. But I mean, I think we've established that I have a far bigger chip about this movie.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, it's okay.
But then, of course, at the after foxhole scene, we have the massive Japanese counterattack, and it's so sweeping that it drives the men off the ridge. I should say, by the way, I went and looked at pictures that what they represent as the geographical site that actually was. They did have to climb up a rope ladder to get to the top. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Terrifying.
That wasn't just an artifice for the sake of the movie.
The first time I saw that, though, I'm like, why don't they just, like, the Japanese go up and light that thing and it'll burn the whole thing down?
Yeah.
It's
I think it's sort of the same.
I guess they do have the no man's land up top where they're not just going to wander over to.
And there's the artillery bombardments.
Yeah, right.
Probably strafing and so forth. So,
Gotcha.
At the end, too, they do actually go up and start trying to shoot.
And of course, the moment they do that, they have all this guy shooting him down. So
then we get into our third act, which is oh my goodness! As much as if you could trim down that, whatever, we got through the freaking meat grinder of the whatever, but this one so tasteful, so amazing, voiceovers of just one more. It's so freaking good.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really, and I especially like the fact that it's not just a repeat of him saving guys. It's also him, dodging Japanese patrols, dealing with the artillery. It represents not just what he's doing, but the risks he was running when he was doing it.
Yeah.
Each one's got like a slightly different angle to it too, which is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the graphicness of, for example, having to at one point, cover himself over with the body. I remember the one guy's trying to save the Japanese patrols out there, so he buries the guy, so he sees the guy's eyes.
Yeah, I love that. That's perfect suspense right there. Yeah. Like, it's just, oh my goodness.
I might be wrong. Was that the guy later who was like blinded?
Yes. And he washes off the guy's. Yeah.
That scene though, where he's buried in the dirt and he's got to hide under the body when the soldiers are coming up. Like, I think that scene is helped by the heavy-handedness of Gibson, because he can just, it's like, it's got that structure of it's held together by the strong suspense. I know I've explained this a million times, but the suspense element of this is the secret of that the audience knows that they are under the bodies, and you don't even want to breathe in this scene. Yeah. It's like the Langley heist in Mission Impossible, that same effect. Mm-hmm. You don't want to make a noise, anything. Like, it's
and
perfect.
Then when the Japanese soldier takes the bayonet and stabs the body on top of Doss. And I mean, it's just really, that's where he takes the suspense, kind of ratchets it up to 11. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's lowering the bodies. I feel like the scenes at the base are in detract from it in some ways. Yeah, I kind of want it to be just about it. It'd be much. I wonder how much if it would have been more effective if they had just made it more extended.
Just bodies. Stay up there.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think what happens at the base. What do they show?
It starts with lowering the bodies, and then they're kind of like, "Hey,
I love it
happening."
Though. Of like, it's just slowly trickling in, and this is also suspense of they don't know. And
I think they set it up too. Like, they did show the bodies, but later then they reveal how many. It was like 90 something.
75.
75. Okay, yeah. So it was a high number, and you're like, even the 10, it's only like 12 people, but which is a lot. But then you realize later how many people he saved.
Yeah, and you could have gotten that once Doss himself came down.
That's true.
Well, okay. I'm going to push back real hard on this one. Okay. This is suspense. Like, you've got the two elements of, well, first of all, you've got the secret that's happening that he's up here alone. Nobody knows he's up here. And then you keep cutting back to them, and this is how you get the suspense of they couldn't be any the wiser. And then the only two people that know that when I was watching it, I wanted some main characters to stay there, but I'm glad that they used a couple randos, because NPCs right there, just seeing the bodies come down, because it strengthens that thing of nobody we know is knowing this is going on. And they're just trickling in body after body, and they're like, "Where are these coming from?"
I feel like,
and you need to have that for the storytelling. It's like mystery, basically. You reveal it all at the end, and I know that's what you're saying, to save it for the end.
Yeah.
But you're not going to have that emotional subtext if you don't have the cutting back. It's like sorry, I'm going to get real nerdy. It's like in Notorious. It's that scene where they're at the party and they go downstairs into the basement, and the cutting back and forth to the people being none the wiser is the equivalent of cutting back to the party, and the champagne bottles keep disappearing. And once those champagne bottles go away, somebody's going to come down to the basement and see them there. So It's a suspense thing. It's much more subtle of a suspense thing. But yeah, I do see what you're saying though. But you kind of have to be obvious with suspense.
I think the way it adds to the suspense too is like, Desmond could just, he saved a lot of people. He could have just called it a day, but you see already how many people he's saved. You've seen the fruits of it. And then now he's going to continue going out there. He doesn't even know if people are dead. He doesn't know if he's going to die. He just keeps asking God for one more. It's like that righteous, like selfish, I just want one more,
love
God.
that. That's so good.
But what I'm thinking is that the degree to which it would have underscored just how much he was sacrificing if he didn't know what was happening. Because from his perspective, he's just putting bodies down there.
You don't know if they're dead or alive.
I mean,
exactly. I agree with that.
I see. Yeah, that could be very effective.
I think both. I think your way, if they did it your way, it would be effective. I think the way they did it this way, it would be effective.
The thing is, though, that you think it has that effect. In real life, it would have that effect. Yeah. You'd be in there and being like, oh, no, or like, nobody knows I'm up here. I'm probably going to die up here. But I'm doing this anyway. I'm being an audience member sitting in a seat, knowing he's going to make it to the end, you need that cutting back and forth. You need the knowledge is what I'm saying. For suspense to work, you need to know the subtext of they don't know. Yeah. That's those shots going back is they don't know. They don't know. They don't know.
I will also, though, the part of what kind of cheapened it for me was the fact that I don't think the scenes down there were as well acted. Because I keep thinking, go back to the scene where Glover and the soldier comes in. Yeah. It's that when Glover and the soldier go in and Glover sees all of his men who've been rescued, and there's such a nonchalance. They're like, "Hey, Captain," like, "Whoa, I guess all that suffering's done with."
They're all high on morphine. They're all high on morphine.
But their
that's what I'm saying though. Of they need to not know, and it's like. He knows what he's doing with the suspense, and it does break the suspension of suspension of disbelief. Yeah. That this is not how it would happen in real life. But for the sake of the movie, I'm sure the effect that it has on you as an audience emotionally is go up there. You got to
save him. Like go help. And that's what I was thinking first time watching.
When you want to scream something at the screen, that's suspense.
Yeah. So I never felt the need to scream that. I kind of felt like that. It was just. If anything, they would have gotten in the way.
I could see that too. Yeah, it's like.
But then you get that. Then you get the climactic scene where the last person he rescues is Howell, and that is where he handles the gun. And this is where I respected Garfield's performance more than I was respected what he was asked to do, which is he's finally given a gun and he uses it for a very practical purpose. But this is where this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I feel like Gibson is chipping away at his principal objections to holding a gun, because finally, he is, contrary to what his claim is, he is holding a gun.
He did touch the gun. Yeah,
he did touch the gun.
Yeah, I realized that last night too. I'm like,
and well, okay, no. Are you talking about the part where he does the?
Yeah, he takes the gun and uses it to make the.
It's not about touching a gun; it's about using it, and I love that moment because it's like, oh no, he's going to use the gun. Oh, it's that suspense of they've set it up this whole time. He's against using a gun. Yeah. And it's like, is he going to finally take up a gun? Yeah. And he rolls it into that sheet, and it's like, oh, yeah.
And you know what I think sells that? Is that when he grabs the gun, the look, it's like disbelief, disgust, horror even on his face. Yeah. And yet it's like in that moment, he doesn't know what else to use.
He has to use it. Yeah. It reminds me of the parable of like that Jesus said about like healing on the Sabbath. He's like, well, if your ox or whatever falls down a well, you're not gonna not save it. Like so, he's kind of
ox in the mire.
He's kind of pushing. Yeah, he's like kind of pushing his boundary a little bit because he knows that he can save somebody, and he's not using it. He's not going to kill anybody with it.
That's a perfect segue into the setup for this sequence. Of he doesn't want to fight on, or they it's not even he doesn't want to do it. They show it with the officers first. Of I'm going to ask Doss to fight tomorrow because we need him. Yeah. It's like I know it's on the Sabbath, and it's perfect because at the end of Act 2, they're all on board with what he is now. Yeah, and they respect his values and they don't want to break them. But he's like, I got to ask him, and then Doss does it, and he's not breaking his values. No. it's exactly what you're saying, ox in the mire.
It shows a spiritual growth in him too. It's like he's got these set principles, but he knows that how to apply them and where the true spirit behind it is. And it's like he's not going to leave his brothers to go die on the battlefield on the Sabbath. Like that's not what God would want from him, you know. So.
Yeah, it's the lesser sin for the greater good.
Yeah.
I guess.
Following.
I hate that term, the greater good, but
I'll be honest. That message went over my head, and I kind of feel like.
Well, I think we're piecing it together right now.
Yeah, but you in a well-made movie, you shouldn't necessarily have to piece it together.
It's the same. Let me point it out. They might. I think it's more subtextual, is what that is. But they play it out much more on the surface with the last episode that we did. At the end of Quick and the Dead, the Western movie with Sharon Stone, where she's the hero, and there's this gunfight competition, and she's got to come up against this guy. There's a character in there that is very similar, if not exactly the same as Desmond, who also very similar to a character named Clyde in our movie Men of the Gun. If you want to go watch that, which is definitely going to be up by, or maybe it will be up by the time we finish this.
Yeah.
Say, Aaron, if I wanted to see Men of the Gun,
yeah,
where would
if
I go?
you want, it's here on this channel. If you want to say, well, if it's on the podcast, go to Transcend Entertainment on YouTube. But yeah. Anyway, so Cameron Crowe. No, not Cam.
Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe's. I said that because I was looking at you.
Sorry, guys. My name is Cameron.
Yep. Hey, Cameron. Anyway, so Russell Crowe's character in this movie is all about that, and he ends up, unlike Desmond, violating his code for this gunfight thing. It's at the last thing. He's basically forced by the villain of this movie to have to shoot people. Like everything is put up against him. I love this character's journey, and you think he's lost everything by the end of he's killed several people, and he out of necessity, but he's taken this vow of violence.
Non-violence.
Vow of violence. That's
I think a vow of
I vow to be
different
violent in
movie.
every interaction.
That would be a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Quentin Tarantino's
Vow
last
of violence.
Yeah, everybody takes that out. So.
Yeah, vow of. I can't even remember.
Samuel L. Jackson takes
Vow of
the
nonviolence,
vow of
but-
violence.
So, that's amazing. You'd be the star. Okay. Sorry. Sidebar. Anyway, so I'm going to have to do so much editing for this episode. So the vow of nonviolence that Russell Crowe's character in this movie ends up having to kill multiple people. And by the end of this, he thinks he's lost everything. And the main lady kills the villain. And her dad in this movie was the marshal of this town. And he was killed at the beginning of the movie. All the spoilers, by the way. And
I'll probably forget.
And anyway, but she takes her father's marshal badge, and she just casually tosses it to him at the end of the movie, and it's like it's perfect physical storytelling, and that's a charged object, by the way. Brian McDonald, go look that up. I'm not going to cover that again. Anyway, but he tosses this badge to her, or she tosses this badge to him, and it's implied, oh, he's going to be the marshal of the town now. That's a perfect job. And he gets this balance of you can be nonviolent, you can have those inclinations, but also be a man of the law.
And defend yourself.
Yeah.
I like that.
So there is my very long-winded scheme that I can't remember why I said it to begin with.
Because you're talking about how
growth.
Desmond Doss has had that growth. Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So Desmond doesn't, he has a flat arc. He doesn't develop into something else, which I think is great.
He's refined in the fire. Right?
But yeah, he holds out till the end and doesn't do anything. And there's that one scare with the gun of, is he going to take up the gun and start shooting people? Nope, he doesn't.
That would be the worst movie ever made if he did that.
Yeah, that would be the worst.
The person, to the degree that there's an arc here, it's Glover's arc, really. How he goes from being the one who's driving the effort to kick Doss out of the unit to where he's almost respectfully.
Well, actually, everybody
scheduling.
but him has arcs. That's how a flat arc. He changes the world around him.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So Jesus is the perfect flat arc, by the way.
Yeah.
Changed the entire world by what he did. Cool. And it happened at the midpoint of time, by the way. But I'm getting very nerdy with that.
I like that.
Meridian.
Greatest story ever told.
But then he, oh no, of course we forgot to mention the fact that all these people have been lowered down by Doss's unique rope trick.
Mm-hmm.
So
the bra.
Yeah, the bra. And the last person that he lowers down is Hal. And Hal's, it happens a little hastily. I remember Vaughn's like, he kind of bounces a bit when he hits the rocks.
Yeah.
That was a critique I had, is how fast Desmond comes down on that rope.
Yeah. He almost
would have broke his arm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. It was whoever like that.
Yeah.
Like that would have snapped his arm.
And you see whose body he's using for balance, for counterweight? Smitty's.
Oh yeah, he got him down. Yeah. Now I remember.
He gets.
Oh, that is so cool.
He saved him.
I love that.
Yeah, which
because he was trying. Because in the counterattack, he's trying to save Smitty, and he brings Smitty to the edge, but Smitty dies, and they just leave Smitty there while he's busy rescuing everybody. And then the last body gets down. He's kind of using it to help get himself down.
Yeah,
and he gets to save his friend in the midst, which is nice.
So and then we get and then they announce they're doing the attack next day. The men won't go without Doss. Doss compromises. They go up there.
Such a cool scene.
That's what I'm talking about.
Hold on.
Everybody has changed, and at the beginning of the movie, they're like, nope, you can't even be here. At the end, they're like, we're not going without him. And oh my goodness, that's so good.
Hold on. Private Doss is praying for us.
Yes. I love that. Just that little quiet moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's like,
Gibson doesn't do subtle very well, but that little subtle moment is just great.
It's almost like he does it by accident.
Maybe. I don't know. But I think when he wants to do subtle, he can do it, but it's not his inclination.
It was pretty I would say that's not even that subtle. Like he's praying, which is like good.
I don't know if subtle's the right word. It's just a quiet moment. Yeah. He's not great. Or he doesn't
It's not like there's a bam, bam, there's not like crazy music. It's like done. It like the silence is like kind of what it speaks loud about.
There's no guy being sacrificed up on top of a pyramid moment going on here.
But it really stands out because it's then followed by another of his montages of sadism where they're all charging in and they're all blowing apart the Japanese. They're torching the tunnels.
I'd agree with that.
And then of course you have this, which is easily my exhibit A for Gibson's cinematic sadism, the seppuku of the commander.
Yeah, I agree with you on this.
Which
didn't need to be.
No,
didn't need to be
it's
there.
very unnecessary.
You are literally being introduced to his character as he's being killed.
Yeah, it is pretty. It is pretty intense.
I'll give you that because even when watching that scene, I was like, was Mel Gibson just like, yeah, that would be cool. If
this would be so badass.
And it also gets, but it actually does work. And this goes back to my other point. If this is a film about the Battle of Hacksaw Ridge and not about Desmond Doss.
Yeah, they kind of lost the thread there.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe Gibson thought he could somehow do both at the same time.
It was that important to the battle because he's losing the battle. I get that.
Yeah, it's not about the battle. They should have. This is how good storytelling works. The tension of the movie has been resolved. One more scene and you're done.
Yeah, they could have ended. That's what I was just thinking.
They don't need to see that.
They could have just literally.
It's not about that.
Desmond Doss is praying for us.
Yeah. End of movie. That's it.
And that's what I felt too. I'm like, the movie's over.
Yeah.
We don't need to see another battle.
But we have to see how Desmond Doss gets injured. And this is another distortion.
You know what? That's true. You're right.
And
they could have done like Desmond is praying for us. Jump cut. Smash, boom, Desmond.
Or they just didn't. They don't have that.
They don't even need the opening one. Yeah. But I do love that prayer though.
Yeah, at the beginning,
intercut with the setup for the one more with the what is specifically the last verse
that will take up wings and fly like eagles.
Or it's something about the tiredness or something.
They will run and not get tired. They
run and not be weary, walk and not faint is the King James version. Yeah.
But that's assuming, of course, it's about that, not about but you get but then you have also the Japanese soldiers surrendering, and I so hate the scene because one, it is not what actually happened so, but we can accept that. But it's also that it involves all these people being very stupid about something that in May of 1945, if you were stupid about it, you would already have been dead, which is the assumption these people are genuinely surrendering and not doing the totally unsurprising.
Yeah. This whole last sequence undermines the entire movie. I agree.
Especially
it is a really cool if he were to be forced into an action scene like this, which it's really Gibson forcing him into this situation. But him hitting away the grenades and stuff is great suspense thing because he's not giving up his things. He's not using it as a weapon. He's saving as many people as he can, including Japanese because they're right there.
Yeah, he did because they said he sent down 2. They both died, but
he actually kicks it back at the Japanese.
Okay, well, that's a Gibson touch.
Yes, it is. And he creates a scenario where he has to do that because you have these Japanese soldiers who are supposed to be surrendering, and they are literally ringed by American soldiers. So there is nowhere to kick it to but to the Japanese. So he basically puts Doss in position of...
And that's a contrived situation by Gibson, is what
that's
you're
still
saying.
Well, it is contrived because that's not how...
He could have kicked it out of the circle entirely. But that would be the Superman approach, which he is a Superman character.
Yeah, what happened was the way Doss got injured in real life was that it was during the next attack on the ridge where he was with a patrol. They stumbled across Japanese. They threw grenades. That's how he got injured. And then, and Gibson deliberately left this out, he was then subsequently, before he was evacuated, shot by a sniper. And because of that, he lost, I think, control over 90% of his left arm.
Oh, wow.
He was on permanent disability the rest of his life. And interestingly enough, his wife, Dorothy, she was not a nurse when they met. She became a nurse after the war because he couldn't provide. And again,
I think that's a good change by the screenwriters, but
I agree. It's a good change. And that level of detail wasn't necessary. But it's the contrived nature of these soldiers that are surrendering that would not have been surrounded up close. Hey, let's get within grenade throwing range. They would have had those guys like on their bellies. They would have done all these things and not create this contrived situation, which has Doss sort of slapping back grenades and whatnot in order to make.
He has to become pacifist action hero because Gibson wants him to be.
And that's why I take that and I connect it back to the 2 previous scenes that I've referred to.
I think jumping into this last sequence is jumping into movie escapist territory. Whereas if you were to end it just after Dawson's praying for us, like that would hammer home the message and that would be reality based. I'd say that would be more like a Saving Private Ryan.
But it also gets to why I don't think he's respecting Doss's pacifism. He's respecting Doss's faith, but not his pacifism.
Oh, and I see what you're saying because he's like hitting the grenades. I can see that.
It's like he's focusing upon what matters to Gibson. So, but that again goes back. But then we get the scene where he is lowered from. He's being we connected back to the beginning. He's being escorted. He's being evacuated from the ridge by his surviving buddies. They retrieve his Bible so he can descend with his Bible. Yeah, and that's the movie. With the
I'm sorry.
Well, it seems that we reached a consensus with that whole thing.
I knew if I could keep this going for long enough.
Yeah.
I still like it. I liked both.
I don't think the consensus is bad movie because Gibson likes his gore. I think it's just for me it's like despite Gibson's inclinations, it's a good movie that hammers home the message.
Every once in a while, 2 films will share a bond to transcend time, space, and even genre. These similarities go down to their DNA. So let's dissect, deconstruct, compare and contrast. It's time to go crisscross.
Crisscross.
Well, that's possibly the best delivery of that we've had.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. Phil's might be a competition. What, did Phil do it?
I don't think Phil did.
Oh, no, he didn't. I should have had him do it. I'll have him do it the next time. So, the most obvious thing, well, maybe it's maybe not obvious because when I pointed out, or when I told these movies to Mark, he had no idea what the parallel was
at first. Yeah.
But it's Trial of Conscience for both of them. Specifically, both of them are religious trial of conscience, but you could, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but yeah.
And to me, it gets to the very kind of the element of storytelling, which is often eternal, which is the notion that what we're talking about here is something that it's in the Bible, it's in so many other works of literature, of art, of the notion of a person's beliefs being tested and their desire to remain true to them.
Yeah. And
as both films demonstrate, it is not an easy challenge.
No.
No. It's very difficult. Okay. I'm gonna bring up this. Everybody knows this. It's so hard, like almost impossible to tell a Superman story. And that's the reason why. It's not because he's got all these superpowers. That's a very big thing, but it's because he's a flat art character, and there's not many people like that, especially nowadays, that just maintain us. And I'm not saying you have to maintain my specific moral code, but we live in a time that just, as it seems, as it goes further along, there's less people that even have a moral code, and there's just, I do whatever I feel like, or I don't know. But
they make excuses.
Yeah. But these are two figures from the past that we can look back to be like, yeah, like they were legit, with it. Yeah. Like they knew what they were doing.
I think The Man for All Seasons tells that especially well because you have the contrast with Richard Rich and to a lesser degree the Duke of Norfolk, who are people who we see degrees of compromise. In the Duke of Norfolk, it's the whole, go along, get along. And in Richard Rich, it's the notion of the attractions of doing so and the notion of why
someone might. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's one that helps us to understand the nature of the challenge facing Mord State, who believes that he could go down that route. In fact, we see periodically, we didn't get into this, how that incentive is like when he's telling his household, he's got to let them all go. Mm-hmm. And then later when we see the messenger going and the home is basically gutted because they've had to sell everything in order to continue. He's made all those sacrifices, whereas Richard Rich, by taking the path of compromise, he does die in his bed. He does die a man of comfort and means, but what's it all compared to the price, the cost he paid of his soul?
Yeah.
And unlike, say, someone like Cromwell or Norfolk, where we don't see that cost evident, that's one of the things that I think make Hurt's performance so fascinating, is that we do see him, sort of doing that tally, and even when he makes that cost, pays that price, you can see that that he is aware that it was a cost.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, they're telling the same story, but I'd say A Man for All Seasons is a very logical version, very meticulously dialogue.
Much more lawyery type. Yeah.
It's a case for why you should, or why one would follow his faith, or how one could follow his faith in the face of contradiction or conviction. And I feel like Hacksaw Ridge is a much more like emotional, popcorny, like
very Gibson-y thing.
Very Gibson.
Gibson is a very emotional story, or actors, director, whatever. Like he's a very strong personality, emotionally wise. So.
Yeah, not to say like A Man of All Seasons doesn't have emotions, but it's definitely more of what's the argument,
well,
what's the
kind of.
Yeah, I know. It's very dry.
Yeah,
in a good way, but yeah, it's like
it's British.
Yeah, you have that.
You can see it sort of like the contra. It's like Man for All Seasons speaking to the head, Hacksaw Ridge speaking to the heart.
Yeah, very much so. Another similarity is the family coming in to convince him to just secede, hey, just say the oath. It shows, again, like how you said his daughter might be smarter than him. She really took that time to figure out a logical argument that would convince him. May not be what's in your heart, just say the words. And I love that line of an oath is like a man holding water in his hands. If he's just to open it, he loses himself, right?
That seems like a very Taoist metaphor.
Yeah, it was philosophy. I mean, philosophy. Yeah.
It is a great line.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And again, with Desmond, it's like, hey, his wife wants him to, I don't care about your pride. I don't care about how you look. If you're dishonored, discharged, I just want to be with you. And I don't want you to go to jail. And she's trying to get him to kind of, and I think the same thing is the same motivation as I always forget his name, but he brought her in to kind of convince him to do so. And so that's another similarity.
What's interesting in terms of the contrast is that you, as you're describing, you have the flat arc in Hacksaw Ridge. You don't really have that in A Man for All Seasons.
Well,
in the sense that he doesn't really change anybody in it.
It's almost like
right.
it is a flat arc. It's just a non-conventional flat arc where he does, like with the Paddington is a perfect example of, he changes the whole family and the whole town and whatever. And this one is kind of the reverse of that, of everybody's on his side at the beginning. By the end of it, he is squished down into this lump of, is he going to be a lump of coal or a diamond by the end? And it's that decision of, is he going to give up his life for this?
And it's another thing, he died and Desmond didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that Moore's redemption as a model, as an example, really comes posthumously.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't even become a saint until 1935.
Which kind of speaks to his, and I mean, the Catholic Church giving him sainthood is making that literal of what I'm about to say, of it speaks to the fact that it goes on, it's an eternal thing that he did that goes on after his death. And he's gotten his place in heaven. He's diamond up in heaven rather than a coal that abandoned on earth, like probably Rich was. I don't want to judge his conscience, but that's what he represents in this story. He's kind of the anti-Moore.
Yeah,
he's a foil for
I like
Moore.
to say maybe if he converted on his deathbed or asked for forgiveness, he'd be in heaven, but he'd be naked, and Moore's gonna have the crown and cool
something
stuff,
like that.
So it's like the reverse of where he was at, right? So
but that is interesting about how all those people who abandoned Moore versus where Doss ultimately draws everyone to him.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And both of them work for different reasons. Man for All Seasons is a very depressing ending, just on the earthly level. But it's got that little core, that little diamond thing at the end of right when he's executed, like he's earned his place in heaven. And I kind of wish they didn't have the thing at the end that they have for True Stories, which is another parallel. They're both true. Is that it kind of focuses on the earthly realm. I wish they would have not had that, like, just because it's conventional to have that for True Stories. I wish they would have just ended on the panning up and then boom, and then cut to credits and just leave you with your thoughts.
I actually want to go back to what you were just saying a moment ago about how it's on a, it ends on a kind of a downer note.
Yeah.
I actually would push back against it slightly, because I think what really sells that as being not quite as depressing of an ending is the grace that Schofield demonstrates in his acting.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Which is that he's not in despair. I mean, the people around him, his wife's in despair.
He's ready to go.
I did oversell that. It's mainly the depressing part is just you learning what happened to everybody after it.
Yeah,
And,
I actually thought it was like a redemptive. You could see like all the people who wronged him ended up the same way he had, except he got to die honorably and they didn't.
Yeah,
so.
and it gets to how that it was really a posthumous event, and that gets to where he's kind of like the Christ-like figure in the sense that his death is the redemption, and because clearly it wasn't working in his life.
Yeah.
And I love that you just pointed that out. He's a Christ-like figure, because I don't know if this is a conventionally Christian thing or if it's just a Mormon thing, but we talk about types of Christ. So you want to be it's kind of the lighthouse metaphor of you want to reflect his light.
Yeah,
So you're not Christ yourself.
No, but you want to.
You're a little.
You want to reflect him.
Maybe
a mirror.
Maybe lowercase Christ. It's kind of like the Peter sacrificed upside down, or I don't know.
No,
we're getting really deep in this.
Well, Paul talks about it. He's like, you guys want to. That's why we're called Christians. We're tiny Christs, right? So the goal eventually in the end is to be indistinguishable from Christ, because we have his righteousness.
His people.
You've been refined to the point where someone looks at you, they see Christ through you.
In
it's
your
like that
visage,
iconography. And so, and that's what he's doing. He's living out what he's called to do. He's to die for his faith as that sacrifice.
And this gets back to, I think, another of the contrast to the film, which is that Bolt and Zimmerman and Schofield make that a very subtle thing. Whereas Gibson, it's, a thunk when it hits you on the head. I kind of felt like that final scene.
I mean, he literally did that.
And you know what made me
Passion of the Christ.
Kind of, and it's funny because Gibson is Catholic, and I didn't realize that until we were talking. But like, it's almost like A Man for All Seasons is how a Catholic would tell the story. And like Hacksaw is how like a Protestant would. I feel like
it is really cool.
In Catholicism is more, and I'm not saying Catholics aren't emotional. They are, but a lot of the church is around logic and philosophical arguments, and a lot of Protestantism is also based on like it has to be very emotional and very heartfelt.
Yeah, and I love. I'm going to get very theological here, but not too theological, but. I love that you can be in the shoes of these people. I'm not Catholic, and I don't particularly like Catholic doctrine in certain ways. Yeah. And I mean, I've come to like Catholicism better over the years, but I relate more with Protestantism. I'm not Protestant myself, but I love that they point out in several times in this movie that he respects the authority of the Pope, and that's his thing. Like he explains the Catholic doctrine of the Pope was there with Christ. He is our only link to our Lord, and
St. Peter,
that's where they get their keys of their. I don't know if they call them keys. That's a Mormon term, but their priesthood line goes through that, and that's how
apostolic succession.
Apostolic succession, and for Protestantism, it may differ slightly from church to church, but their authority comes from the Bible itself.
Yeah.
And that gets to one of the other interesting differences between these two, which is that Bolt presents it very legalistically. Mm-hmm. While it's ultimately a matter of faith for Thomas More, that for him, he's arguing in the sense, it's almost as though if the right argument could be presented to More, he would go along with Henry's marriage.
Yeah.
Whereas with Hacksaw Ridge, it's very much about belief and not about theology. It's not about canon law.
Yeah, not at all. They just put those little touches of theology where they need it.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm talking about. Like it ends the points at where they could go into theological Bible bashing places, like with the not the son, but the prospective son. The Lutheran guy. They don't bash. It's just little clever jabs, and it's just him standing to his principles of I want my daughter to marry a Catholic.
What the Lutheran guy, even he was like, I don't believe in. I believe in the Reformation of the Church, but to go against the church itself, to name yourself king and head of the church without any, because like at least like he said, it's like there's an explanation for how the Pope could lead the church.
Yeah.
There's no explanation for the king. He's just usurping the kingdom.
He's towing Catholic line of that, like that's part of his conscience,
and not just the Catholic line. He's invoking Magna Carta. He's talking about how it's a violation of English law. Right. So this goes back to how it's
going against all his morals. It's his great storytelling. The whole world is coming down.
It's attacking him both as a believer in Catholicism and as a lawyer.
And and as his countrymen. So
but it shows like how they eventually. I'm wondering because I feel like they weren't clear about whether or not the Lutheran guy became Catholic again. I don't feel like he did. I feel like he.
Didn't he? I thought he did it just so that he can marry him. Marry her.
He said, "I still believe in Reformation of the Church, but to go
what Henry's doing, he basically is trying to side up to More by saying how he agrees with More's opposition to what Henry is doing, and so basically that in a sense it's Lutheran by saying he's not becoming an Anglican. He's sort of like saying, I disagree with that. I'm going to stay being a Lutheran. But that doesn't mean he's becoming Catholic.
Yeah, it's like he's kind of like he's agreeing with. They both agree that what the king is doing is wrong, and I think maybe eventually he converts back. But I feel like that's what happened. Is that's where they were able to meet on the both sides. But I could be wrong. But that's what I viewed it as. But it was like to show like hey, even like as a Protestant or whatever, you don't have to believe in the.
I didn't get to the. Sorry. Sorry. Finish your thought.
Well, yeah, you don't have to believe in the authority of the Pope to agree with Thomas More here. It's the fact that the king is claiming to be the head of the church.
Yeah, I'm just
divorce his wife.
and I wasn't saying that's kind of the opposite of what I was saying. Of you don't have to believe that the Pope is the authority. You just have to know that he knows it, and he's sticking to his guns.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get to the third leg of my
my
spiel. No, it's okay. So there's Catholic, Protestant, and then of course Mormonism, which you might not know the one of this one, but we believe that there was a falling away of the authority after Christ died, because he was the authority, and after the apostles died, it died off with Peter, is what we think.
I would say Protestants. Some Protestants would agree with you on that too.
It's probably, and then but the Catholic Church very staunchly believes Peter gave the authority to whoever the first pope was. Yeah, and then or like he was the Pope,
he was
basically.
The first Pope, yeah.
But so then we get into Joseph Smith is the guy who had a literal vision that you don't have to believe this, but this is what I believe.
Yeah.
That he restored the church authority to the earth, and he was the first prophet, not Pope or whatever. He's just the speaker for Christ on the earth. Mm-hmm. Like he doesn't have Christ's authority, but he is a humble prophet like Moses or whoever. I feel like I'm back on my mission anyway, but that's what he represents. Mm-hmm. And he's the authority of the church, but I don't know. I'm getting into nuances that I don't know what Catholics actually believe.
I would
about
say
the
that
Pope,
the Catholics are in a similar sense is not. They obviously don't believe in Joseph Smith, but like this, the idea is,
but the Pope
God
is that version for them.
God is electing somebody to be Christ's representative on earth.
Right.
The Pope is the vicar of Christ. He's occupied the position that Jesus will take during the second coming. I'm saying this as I was raised in the Catholic confirmed. And the idea is that position, basically, the seat is being kept warm until Christ returns. When that return happens, the Pope will then abdicate and Christ will take over.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah. And for us, we don't believe that level, that they stand in the place of Christ. They're just Christ's representative that takes care of the physical church on earth. And then when he comes back, Christ will be the head of everything. But anyway,
that's what the Catholics are as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Okay.
Like when they're saying he stands in the place
just
of
different
Christ
name,
is
Pope,
not
prophet, same thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my point being with all of this is I like that they're consistent with the belief systems of these characters, and you can relate to them even though you are not these ones.
Yeah, because like Seventh-day Adventists, some people view it's like
it's kind of weird,
but weird. But yeah, I mean, he believes in God.
But it's what he believes, and they sell it. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. And they might muddy it up with some Gibson-y stuff near the end, but the flat line works perfectly. Or not flat line. That's different. The flat arc works perfectly. But anybody else got any more points?
This was cool. It was cool watching these back to back and like.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite episode so far. Really? I say that about every podcast. But
I've had fun. I mean,
this one was much deeper than.
I don't think I've ever talked about a movie for
4 hours.
4 hours
oh my goodness! So. Yeah, this is our record.
A lot of this is going to be, I think, getting.
Our last one was 3 hours for Interstellar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Frequency. Yeah. Now that we have gotten very deep theologically, we will have our star ratings. So, let's start with you. What would you give Man for All Seasons?
4.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, why not 5?
I don't know. It's good, but it's not like my favorite kind of movie is like Jaws. So
gotcha. Yeah.
4.5. I would say I docked a half just because it's like, I don't know. 4.5. That's just what I'm.
So if King Henry had been fighting a shark,
it would have been 5 stars.
It would have been 5 stars. Okay.
Just because it's dry and British, basically.
It's dry and British. Yeah. There's no. I would have liked some more heart. I would have liked to tear up a bit.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see a modern remake of this where they kind of commercialize it up a little bit just for entertainment.
Well, we have that. It's the 1980s TV version that Charlton Heston did.
Oh, jeez, I don't want to watch
Thomas
that.
More.
I made sure to say
I will not stand for the. It's like just screaming.
I will not stand for this. You
I love-
damn dirty Protestants.
I love Charlton
Oh my
Heston.
goodness.
And I love that he's always somehow in a biblical movie.
he's
like
not a great actor, though.
he plays Moses, and then in the next movie he's Ben-Hur, and then in Greatest Story Ever Told he's John the Baptist.
For me, Man for All Seasons is a definite 5-star movie.
Cool.
And it was one that I don't think I fully, was confirmed to that till I'd come back and seen it, and it was just, it's a gorgeous movie. It's an evocative movie. It's fascinating how you take these very abstract and even legalistic concepts and make it into this gripping drama. And it's like a synthesis of everything that's great about filmmaking: production, acting, direction, writing, and I can't imagine now it being anything less than 5 stars. It's definitely one of those rare best film Oscars that I think really warrants it.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to agree with well both of you guys said, but also personally I would probably give this a 4 stars for the same reason as you. It's a little dry and kind of boring, but if I'm in the right mood, I'd very much 5 stars, and I have to give it 5 stars because it's an important movie, but like in the best way possible. It's a real story. Sure, they fudged a little things for the sake of storytelling, but I don't think that they compromised the message or anything. It's the same thing. I don't think they threw a wrench in the system, but too much. I don't know if you disagree with that.
No,
Mark,
I agree completely. I mean, it's why I long ago had to accept that as a historian, that you're not going to get historically accurate movies.
Yeah.
But you're going to
They
get
have
ones,
to change things.
You got to, and for the sake of storytelling.
So our star reviews for Hacksaw Ridge?
3.
Okay.
I would give it a 4, but you made a good point about the end. It's kind of self-indulgent at the end.
Yeah.
And I'd say this was a more emotional watch, a better watch the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like standing on its own, A Man for All Seasons is the better film. It's got the better dialogue, better act, the better storytelling. It's more subtle.
I'd say it's more consistent.
And more consistent. Yeah. I do like this film though. I'm not big on ratings, so like usually I'm just like or dislike. I like this film. Would I watch it again? Probably. Maybe in a couple of years, though. I watched it too much in the past 6
I think
months.
you're good at rating, though, because, like, you'll see once we get to my rating, but, like, you're tempted towards the higher rating when it's a good movie. But
yeah.
I'm glad that you have that reservation of 3 stars. That's great.
It's like, and it's a good movie. I like the movie, but it's not a better film than A Man of All Seasons, I'll say.
Yeah, by no, it is maybe more entertaining film.
It's more entertaining. It's a better... If I had to pick a good movie about faith to show to my grandparents or my kids.
Well, aside from the violence.
Yeah, sure. You know what? My kids, if they're 15, 16, I'd probably show them Hacksaw Ridge.
You could really just take, in some ways, just the first half of that film and show it to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like, I mean, I can edit too, so I could just chop
just cut off the
end, right?
Gory deaths.
Yeah, like it's a better film for all audiences, and that's why I'll give it that. Like it's, you don't have to have a history degree or a ton of British knowledge to understand it, which is a good thing in the sense of you can tell. But that's also, it's a product of its area. We're Americans, we're gonna have more context than somebody else. So
it's also one where the commitment to one's beliefs is rewarded and convinces people.
Yeah, it's a much more upper of an ending.
It's a better feeling. Yeah, definitely. That more. It's more emotional.
Ironically, after the hell of that war thing, it ends on a feel good moment.
Yeah, on a high note. So
so Mark.
Well. When I finished watching it was 3 stars, and I have to say, the more I thought about it, the more it came down to 2 for me. Technically, it's a great film. I mean, I give Mel Gibson his props, but I do feel he if I had to choose the person who I think is the most overrated director in working today, it would have to be Mel Gibson. And it's because he is heavy-handed. And I feel like that really takes what was a very interesting approach that had great acting in it and just made it into this gore fest, which to me kind of lost the thread.
Yeah.
Which is that it's you're making a film about a man who was true to his beliefs.
Which it's a harsh cut right at the midpoint of
and
this is what we're doing now.
I wonder how Desmond would feel about it too, like watching it.
So that's true. I think you hit it right on the head. It feels like two different movies.
Yeah, and that's why for me, I mean, I can't quite give it 1 star because there's a lot of good in it, a lot of good things about it cinematically, but at the end of the day, it's 2 stars for me. Okay,
well, I think I'm going to surprise both of you guys and say it's a 4-star movie for me. So, yeah, okay, with a caveat of I'd watch the VidAngel version, but which is the one that my mom is going to watch, but which
that's just the first half of the movie, and him floating in the thing at the end.
It cuts out 12 minutes.
They really lose the deep focus, and it's just everything's blurred out for some reason.
So having watched it, I think I would have VidAngeled it in hindsight, but. I mean, like a Saving Private Ryan, which I thought it would be like, is that's acceptable for me. Like it's not my church standards, but that for me personally, I feel like war movies. For children, of course not, but you need to be affected by it. Yeah. If you aren't affected by it, that's a problem. If you're enjoying the violence. And you're like, yeah, that's cool. This is fine. Problem.
Yes.
Might be a psychopath.
Good. Yeah.
I think David Fincher said the same thing about Seven, which was that when you're finding the people, when you're finding the people who are on the 10th rewatch, those people need to be reported to the FBI because they might be serial killers in the making. Especially if they're taking notes.
Which makes me question why does he make movies like that then?
Well, I think
I guess it's the difference between a Quentin Tarantino and a Fincher.
Because again, back to Quentin Tarantino, it's like Quentin Tarantino makes the violence to be like,
it's entertaining,
and so I don't think he was doing that in this. It was definitely to be revolting. So
I think it's. Yeah, we talked enough about
that. We did.
So
let's not get back into it.
But also, it's one of the things I've came to appreciate from this conversation is that I think it's not that he is a really like a gore fetishist. It's that's just how he.
Yeah, it's just in his nature. That's exactly what I was about to say.
To communicate the message.
Yeah. So, Gibson, get some help. I think many people have told him that, but he is a very skilled storyteller. I think his darker demons just kind of take over sometimes. And like, if you've heard anything about his life, like he's got some dark demons. But
definitely.
Anyway, and we all do, but I like to use that PG-13 razor and try to counteract those demons. So I'd say, with the caveat of watch the VidAngel version, I'd give it 4 stars, and I'd very much I'd cut off that end scene, and then it would be a 5-star movie for me.
It is fascinating to think about how this it'd be a whole interesting subject. Ways in which you could take an existing movie and without adding anything to it, just better editing.
I just want to end with a thing that my mom said that she hit it spot on. That at the peril of, sorry, I don't know if this is because my mom said it or if it's so on point. At the peril of their own lives, they stood for what they believed. So if you'd like to access bonus features and deleted clips, which there's going to be a lot for this one because it's a 4-hour original. I don't know how much you just listened to, but there are 4 hours of this. If you'd like to get access to bonus features and deleted clips from Criss Cross and our sister show Facets of Story, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/transcendentertainment. That's SCEND Entertainment. And that's it for today's Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
Yay.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back.